Good evening, friend, and welcome back. It is good to have you here again tonight. Take the weight off. Let the shoulders soften. The hands can rest wherever they have fallen. The eyes may close whenever they are ready. You do not need to hold on to anything you hear. Tonight we are going to spend the evening inside an ordinary English country cottage in the 1800s. One low doorway, one earth or brick floor, one open hearth, with an iron pot slung on a chimney chain of 8 or 10 heavy links. One family drawn close within 4 feet of the fire, not the version the storybooks show. The real evening, warm and slow, done widely across the year, spring to haytime to harvest to winter, so we hear one cottage in all its weathers. Somewhere in the drift of it the gentle question the whole night carries: who kept these fires warm for so many 100 years, on their own behalf? On ours? If this kind of slow history is good to fall asleep to, a subscribe and a like help the long calm ones find the people who need them, only when you feel it. And if the mood is there before you drift, tell me in a comment where in the world you are listening from tonight and what the time is where you are. I like to picture you. Someone in a cold bedroom with a lamp turned low, someone driving a long dark road, someone with a hand on a sleeping child. All welcome. Dim the lights if any are still on. Let the fan or the fire hum. Come with me, and let us go back, all the way back, to the 1800s, to a rural English lane at 4 in the afternoon on a low grey day, where the smoke is just lifting from a cottage chimney at the far end of the row, and the mother is bending to the fire. So here we are, on a rural English lane in the 1800s, at about 4 in the afternoon on a low grey day. The lane runs between 2 small ploughlands, with a slight rise to it, and a hedge on either side, and a wooden gate at the far end that has been leaning the same way for as long as anyone can remember. The rooks are already coming home. You can hear them a long way off before you see them, that soft, ragged calling that country evenings have carried for 1,000 years. The light is thin and even, the sort of light that has already given up on any brightness, and is settling gently toward the dusk. At the end of the lane, on the higher side, there is a row of 12 cottages. Not many. 12 doors and 12 chimneys, spaced along a short green with a little pump at one end and a walnut tree at the other. This was the sort of small hamlet Flora Thompson later grew up in and remembered. A knot of cottages set among the ploughlands, small enough for every voice to be known and every dog and every gate. She would come to call the one where she was raised Lark Rise. There were places like it in every English county. We are inside one of them tonight. The cottages are low and long and pale, one story with a chamber built into the eaves above, thatched at the roof or in some parishes tiled, with old red pan tile, whitewashed at the walls, the plaster patched and repatched each spring. The whole row leaning a little into the ground the way an old horse leans into its long standing. There are small, deep-set windows, 2 to a cottage, with wooden frames swollen with 100 years of wet. The doors are low, so low that a tall man ducks by habit as he steps through, and the latch is a plain iron thumb catch-worn smooth by the same hand every morning and every night. The smoke has already begun. From the far chimney first, the third from the walnut tree, a slow soft column that goes up straight in the still air and then bends gently south when it meets the top of the hedge. Then, one after another, from the other chimneys as if answering. This is the 4 o'clock lift, and it is the first sign the day has started to turn indoors. Flora Thompson would remember it exactly. About 4 o'clock, she wrote, smoke would go up from the chimneys, as the fire was made up and the big iron boiler, or the 3-legged pot, was slung on the hook of the chimney chain. That is the smoke we are watching now. We are walking down the lane. Your feet find their own quiet on the trodden grass at the verge, cool and a little damp. Somewhere behind a further hedge a cow lows once, low and long, and is answered from an unseen barn. A boy of about 12, sent for something from the further cottage, comes up the lane in his father's coat with the sleeves turned back, and gives you a small serious nod and passes on. He smells of wet wool, The country evening smells this way, of wool and of turned earth, and faintly now of the smoke rising overhead. We come to the third door in the row. There is nothing about it that says visitor or ceremony. A single flat step of a pale local stone, worn to a slight hollow in the middle. A boot scraper of iron beside it. A dog rose above the lintel that flowered in May and is only leaf now. The latch lifts under the thumb with a small dry click. You bend a little at the doorway and step in, and the light of the room takes you into itself, and the door closes behind you on the lane and the rooks and the last of the grey outside, and you are in. For a moment the room is only warmth and dimness and one point of glow. Then, as the eyes adjust, the shapes come. A settle, drawn to the hearth, a scrubbed pine table, a shelf of pewter above the fire, a dog turning to look at us from the tiles and turning back, and the mother of the cottage straightening from where she has been bending to the pot, with a wooden spoon in her hand and a strand of hair loose across her cheek, and a small, tired, quiet greeting for the visitor she has known would come, because we are the sort of visitor country cottages have always taken in without ceremony at this hour of the day. That is where we are going next, straight into the ring of warmth held by the hearth in the middle of the floor, where nearly all of tonight will be spent. The fire is holding its low glow, ready to be found. The chain is heavy on its hook, and that ring of warmth is the first thing every English cottage evening of the 1800s was built around. Let us stay here a moment, in the middle of the room, and feel it. An ordinary cottage room of the 1800s was small. 12 feet by 14 was a common size, sometimes 10 by 12, sometimes 14 by 16, if the cottage was one of the better sort. The ceiling was low enough that a tall man could put his hand flat on a beam without straightening his arm. The floor was either beaten, earth swept flat every morning with a bundle of birch twigs and rubbed with a piece of hearthstone until it took a soft brown polish, or a chequer of red paments and old stone flags, cool on bare feet but warm within a certain distance of the hearth. In some cottages, especially by the end of the century, the floor was bare pine boards on joists over a small crawl space, but for most of what we are inside tonight it is the older kind, brick or earth. And here is the small quiet fact that shapes everything else in the room. Within about 4 feet of the hearth the room was warm. Beyond about 4 feet it was not. A rural cottage of the 1800s was heated by one open fire, and one open fire, however carefully tended, made a warm ring around itself and left the rest to itself. So the family, without ever quite planning it, lived inside a ring of about 4 feet across, and everything they meant to do at their leisure of an evening they arranged inside that ring. Come and sit for a moment on the settle. A settle is a heavy wooden bench, high-backed to keep the draught off the shoulders, sometimes hollow underneath for the storage of oddments, drawn as close to the fire as anyone can bear. On this one there is a knitted cushion made from wool the mother spun herself, and a folded piece of flannel to lay across the knees. Put your hand out flat toward the fire. At the front, above the coals, the palm gets so warm you must pull it back within a slow count of 10. At an outstretched arm's length the warmth is steady and gentle, the warmth of a good scarf. At the far edge of the 4 feet, near where the settle ends, the warmth is only just a warmth, a suggestion, like the memory of a warm hand held near yours after it has gone. Beyond that, the cool of the room begins, not cold, not, most of the year, cold, just cool, the way a stone church is cool in June. In summer this whole outer ring is the room's blessing. In winter it is the sacrifice made to keep the inner ring alive. Between the settle and the hearth lies a small rag rug. The rag rug is a piece of quiet ingenuity in every cottage. The mother has pieced it, over an autumn or two of evenings, from the least worn parts of old flannel petticoats, from the woolen linings of coats too far gone to keepers' coats, from a strip cut out of the good remaining tail of a smock frock the father grew out of a decade ago. Colours you never quite saw when they were the garment they came from, plum and dun, an old blue and the faded green of a Sunday shawl. Pieced onto a Hessian backing with a hooked needle, worked in the same evenings the family are sitting through now. The rag rug sits between the settle and the fire like a small warm island of remembered clothes, and the coldest square of brick beneath it never touches a bare foot. At the far end of the settle, a dog, not a special dog, a middle-sized brown and white farm dog of no particular breed, a broken tail, a nose greyed early, one ear that lies down and one that stands, a coat that always smells faintly of the outside. He came in with the father half an hour ago and settled straight into his place on the tiles, as if his part of the 4 feet had been reserved. He is fully asleep now. His breathing is regular and low, and his flank rises and falls in a small warm rhythm you can watch if you like. At the other end of the settle, the youngest child, a girl of about 2.5. She is not asleep, but she is very close to it. She's holding a wooden peg doll with a hemp thread of hair, and every minute or so she gives the peg doll a small solemn look, and then leans a little further into the settle back. Her small breath is easy. In the light of the fire her cheek is a soft polished pink. Between the child and the settle back stands a stool, and on the stool, folded, a linen apron the mother has just taken off before crossing to greet the visitor. The apron is scorched a little at the hem from a night by the coals a fortnight ago. The mother made it herself out of a length she wove on a small loom that once stood in the corner but has now been sold. The apron is on the stool in the ring of warmth because it is the mother's habit to leave clothes inside the 4 feet whenever she can, so they hold the warmth of the fire, so a garment that must be picked up again quickly stays soft to the skin. At about 6 feet from the fire, at the edge of the warm ring, sits a small painted press with the tea things in it. Beyond it, past the ring, the cool of the room, the far wall is out of our clear sight from where we sit. It is the coldest wall in the house, and in the deep of winter you can see your breath against it. But we do not sit against the far wall. Nobody in a cottage sits against the far wall by choice. The whole life of the evening happens here, in the ring, close to the low steady warmth of the hearth. Even the small tools of the evening are arranged for the ring. A wooden footstool for the smallest child sits close to the fire's edge, so their feet do not get cold on a brick. The mother's darning basket lives on the settle end so she can knit without leaving the warmth to fetch it. The father's tobacco jar and clay pipe are on the shelf just above the hearth, so his hand finds them without a step. A leather bucket of water for the small emergencies of the evening stands 3 feet from the fire, exactly at the boundary where warmth eases into cool. You could think of it as a small warm island in a large cool room, and it would not be a bad way of thinking of it. Every family and every cottage in this hamlet is sitting inside one such island right now, in 12 small warm rings across the row, each with its own dog, and its own settle and its own child leaning her cheek into the wool of a shawl. And in the darkness outside, the lane running down between the hedges, the rooks now silent, the low grey of the winter afternoon giving up the last of itself to the falling dusk. But that is out there. In here we are held, and we are going to be held all night. And the walls that hold this ring, the whitewashed lime and the low dark beams, are the next warm thing to look at. Turn your head slowly if you like, and let the eyes go around the room. The walls are lime whitewash. In this cottage the wash was renewed just this spring, as it is in most cottages every March or April before the swallows come back. The mother mixes the wash herself out of a bucket of quicklime from the parish lime kiln water and a handful of tallow to soften it, and puts it on with a broad brush of straw, cutting in around the beams and the door frames with a smaller brush cut down to fit. 2 coats, one dry before the next. When it is fresh, the whole room is bright as milk for a few days, and then it settles into the softer creamy white you are looking at now, catching the fire glow warmly and giving it back into the room. Where a shoulder has rubbed the wall over years, near the door and along the corner where the stair rises, the whitewash has been polished by wool and cotton, into a slight glow of its own. You can see the exact height at which the father brushes past, and the slightly higher smudge where an older uncle used to pass. In one place, low down beside the settle, a small hand has pressed the wall for years and left a barely there shadow. The wash is a fresh coat over that history, but the history is not entirely covered. It is one of the small tender things about cottage whitewash, that it takes on the family's own map even when it is new. There are small nails driven into the plaster at intervals, some for hats, some for shawls, some for the corner of a warming pan or a copper skillet. The nails are homemade, forged by a village blacksmith a shilling for 100, and each has a small square head. Between the nails there is nothing. Cottages of the 1800s did not carry pictures on their walls, or not many. In some there is a printed almanac pinned up, sun and moon, feast days marked, the phases of the moon for the year to come. In some there is a small woodcut of the Queen in her early years, coloured cheaply, pinned to the wall in a corner. In this cottage there is one framed sampler on the near wall, worked by the mother's older sister in 1832 when she was a girl of 11. ABC and a small greenhouse and a tree and the words, "Fear God" under it. All done in cross-stitch on unbleached linen. The frame a piece of pine the sister's husband cut and joined himself. The sampler hangs level. The mother straightens it once a week as she dusts. Look up. The ceiling is low, as we have said, low enough that you feel a very slight instinct to duck when you stand. The beams are heavy and dark, oak in this cottage, elm in some. They are 200 years old at least. Cottages like this were built and rebuilt again through the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s, and the beams often outlived their walls twice, coming down out of one cottage and going back up into the next as the parish rebuilt in a slower rhythm than the rest of the world. Look closely, and you can see the old peg holes in the beams from where they used to be joined to other beams in other cottages, plugged now with dowels. There is a slight adze scar down the underside of the nearest one, the mark of the man who shaped it, whoever he was, 170 years ago in a wood. Hung from the beams the year's things. In autumn, a string of onions from the plot, platted by the eldest daughter, some of them still with a little green top. A bunch of dried herbs, thyme and rosemary and marjoram, tied with plain white thread. A muslin-covered bundle that is the bacon flitch of the family pig, hung high in the smoke of the chimney to cure. A ring of dried apple slices threaded on a length of cord, put up in October and used through the winter. A small linen bag of chamomile heads for tea, and at one end of the biggest beam, always, a length of iron chain lying looped over a hook, its ordinary tea-time position, waiting to be taken down again when the pot is next moved. But we will come to the chain in a chapter of its own. On the wall beside the door, one wooden peg holds the father's working coat, an old brown coat of heavy cloth, its collar shiny with wear, its cuffs frayed. Beside it, on a lower peg, his shepherd's plaid, folded, kept for the days he must go out in serious weather. Beside that, the eldest son's rougher coat, cut down from an older one of his father's when he grew into it 3 winters ago. On the wall near the stair, higher, the mother's Sunday shawl on a peg to itself, of a good soft dark green woolen with a dark border, brushed carefully on Saturday nights. Everything on the wall in its own particular place. If you asked the mother which peg the darning apron went on, she would tell you without looking, and if you asked her which peg it had gone on when she came to this cottage as a bride, 16 years ago she would tell you that too. In the corner beside the stair, in a small alcove where the wall thickens for the chimney breast, stands the case clock. It is not a fine clock. It has a plain oak case of country make, a face painted with a rural scene inside its arch that has faded to a soft brown haze, Roman numerals hand-painted, one weight on a chain and one on a string, a slow, low, calm tock that you notice only when the room is quiet as it is now. It was made by a jobbing clockmaker in a small market town about a day's cart ride away, in 1812, and the family bought it second-hand from a cousin's estate in 1841. It has kept the cottage's hours, more or less, through every evening we're going to see. Set against another wall, a scrubbed pine dresser with a shelf of pewter plates above it, dulled to a soft grey, a row of thick-handled cups on their hooks, a pale blue and white cream jug that came into the family from somebody's grandmother and is used only on Sundays, a brown loaf-shaped teapot with a chipped spout, cased in a knitted cosy that has faded from red to a warm brick colour. Below the dresser, a heavy sideboard with 2 low doors, in which lives the parish tin, for the small change the family keeps for the vestry collection, the letterbox, 3 letters ever received from a son at sea, and a wooden bowl of eggs from the yard's hens, 12 cottages along the row, 12 small maps like this on their walls, 12 rag rugs of family cloth, 12 beams 200 years old, 12 chains looped and waiting, 12 mothers whose hands know without looking where every peg is. And above every one of these small things, at the middle of every one of these small rooms, the oldest thing in the whole house, older than the beams even, the fire. The fire has been in this room since the cottage went up, and in the cottage before this cottage, and in the cottage before that. It has never quite gone out. Every night for 200 years and more it has been banked over with its own ash, and found again in the morning. So what is burning in the hearth in front of us tonight is, in the honest way that cottage fires were honest, the same fire that first took light in this parish, before the beams above us were even cut down out of the wood. Come closer and see the hearth itself. In this cottage it is of the older sort, an ingle nook, deep enough that the settle we sat on a moment ago is built partly inside it, so when you sit on the settle your right shoulder is warmed by the wall of the hearth itself, and when you look up into the great black square of the chimney, which is broad and rough and blackened by 2 centuries of smoke. In many cottages, especially the newer ones built since about 1850, this old ingle nook has been replaced by a smaller iron hob grate, a basket for the coal, with a flat plate on either side hot enough to keep a kettle warm. Both do the same work, both hold the household's life. Tonight we are in an ingle, and the wall of the hearth is a good pale worn brick with a fine layer of soot in every crack. Set in the wall of the ingle, on the right-hand side as you look in, is a small oven of iron and brick, no bigger inside than a bread loaf. In some cottages the small oven is used for the family's own baking. In others it is fired only 2 or 3 times a year, when the mother roasts a fowl on a Sunday of some importance. Below the oven is the trivet, a 3-legged iron stand you can slide into the fire's edge to hold a smaller vessel at a gentler heat than the main flame, and beside the trivet a pair of tongs and a small poker, both of black iron, both slightly polished by the mother's hand. Above the fire, hanging down out of the black chimney, is the chain. It is the chimney chain. We are going to give the chain its own chapter later because it deserves it. For now, look at it. 8 or 10 links of heavy forged iron, blackened to soft velvet by soot, ending in a hook that at this moment is holding, 3 feet above the coals, a great iron pot of the traditional cottage kind, black outside, seasoned inside with the fat of a decade of stews, a lid slightly askew, faint steam lifting from it. On the hob at the side of the fire stands the kettle. It is a fat black iron kettle with a hinged handle, not brand new and not old, dented at one point where somebody once dropped it in the yard. It is not on the boil. It is at that particular temperature at which a kettle mutters, that low intermittent undersound that a cottage kitchen carries continuously through the evening. Beside it stands the tin of tea, painted with a fading pattern of red roses, the lid tight against the damp. Now the fire. In this cottage tonight it is wood mostly. This part of the country still has enough woodland, in an old parish pattern kept together against the enclosures, that the labouring family can gather from the parish's traditional wood right 3 loads of dead fall a year. In other parishes it would be gorse and furze from the heath edge, brittle and quick, bundled by the mother and children in June and dried against the shed wall until it is needed. In the fenland cottages it would be peat, cut in blocks in the summer and stacked in a beehive against the gable wall, slow to light, but slow to fail. In the coalfield villages it would be sea coal, brought down by a cart once a month, black and steady and giving out a heavy warmth quite unlike the wood we're watching tonight. All of it husbanded, all of it counted before it is put on. No cottage of the 1800s ever built a fire above what the season could afford, and every cottage banked its last log before bed so the morning would have one still living coal. The wood on the hearth now is oak and ash. There is one thick oak log at the back laid across the andirons that will burn most of the night. Above and in front of it, half burned already, 3 lengths of ash, laid crosswise. On the near edge of the coals, a small pile of glowing embers from the earlier heart of the fire red under a fine grey ash. The flame itself is not tall. It is only just wandering up between the ash lengths, no higher than the palm you had held out earlier. This is the working fire of a cottage evening, a fire meant to last hours, not a fire meant to be admired. A tall fire is a young fire and a wasteful fire. A short even fire is a settled fire and a wise one. The mother tends her fires the way a shepherd tends his flock, quietly without fuss, and always with tomorrow in mind. Listen. There are 3 sounds coming from the fire, and they are the fundamental sounds of the whole cottage evening. First, the low, steady, breathing sigh of the flame, up and back, a sound you notice for a second and then let go of because it is always there. Second, the intermittent tiny tick of a cooling ember, a small sharp fracture as a piece of the burned wood breaks under the shift of its own heat, a sound so small that even the dog on the tiles hears it and does not lift his head. Third, from the pot, the periodic soft gulp of the lid lifting and settling as the steam finds a way out and returns to steam. Under all 3, the small mutter of the kettle on the hob. 4 small sounds, of no importance separately, but together they are the cottage's heartbeat. The fire has been alight in this hearth continuously since the last time it was fully raked out and cleaned, which was Michaelmas of the year before last. Every night since it has been banked, every morning it has been raked out and coaxed back. The mother learned how to bank a fire from her own mother when she was 8 years old, and her mother had learned it from hers, and so on backward for as long as anyone had lived in a cottage in England, which is essentially always. In a moment we will name that skill. In this chapter we only want to name the fire. The other thing the fire is old company. The father, coming in at the end of a long day, sits down on the settle and stares at the fire for 2 whole minutes before he speaks. He has always done this. His father did it before him. It is not that the fire is entertainment, it is that the fire is a place to lay down the day. You cannot lay a day down onto air. You can lay a day down onto a small even flame that has been running quietly all afternoon and does not ask anything of you. He sits, and the fire holds his tiredness for him, and after 2 minutes he can speak. We're going to sit here a while ourselves before the pot moves. Nothing needs to happen. The chain is where it is, the pot is where it is, the kettle is muttering. The mother is going to bring in an armful of hazel to lay by the hearth, and set it down, and take her apron from the stool and stand for a moment looking into the flame as her husband did, and then step back to the pot. That is coming. In the meanwhile, we are sitting close to the oldest fire this family knows, at the middle of its own room, and the room is warm within its ring, and the whitewash is glowing softly on the far wall, and the beam is holding its year's things above us, and the pot on the chain is beginning very quietly to breathe. Beside the fire on the pine table just at the edge of the 4 feet, one small point of made light. That is the next quiet, warm thing to look at. Turn a little toward the table. The table is scrubbed pine of an honest carpentry, made for the cottage 40 years ago by a village joiner. 4 legs, no drawer, 1 crack down the top from an old summer of drought, a slight lean to the northwest leg which the eldest daughter learned young to compensate for. The mother scrubs it once a week with a mixture of sand and a bar of yellow kitchen soap and a good stiff brush, and after that scrub the pine dries pale and soft-grained and a little damp for an hour. That is why on scrubbing day the family eats supper on their laps close to the fire, on the settle and on the stool. The table has been through 50 years and more of that scrubbing, and the grain of the wood is worn to a very slight hollow in the middle where the plates have gone down. At the near end of the table, set into a small iron pincer holder, stands a rushlight. It is not much more than a stalk. It is a stalk. The mother made it herself in June when the rushes were at their best. Let us stay with the rushlight a moment. It deserves it. It was the poor cottage's answer to the very old problem of what to do when the daylight failed, and it was the answer of choice for a great many rural cottages of the 1800s, because it was effectively free. In midsummer, when the meadow rushes stood shoulder-high beside the parish brook, the mother went down at evening with a basket and cut 2 or 3 armfuls, choosing them for straightness and length. She brought them home. She sat with them on the doorstep in the last long light of the June evening, and with the small blade of a paring knife, took the green outer skin off each rush, working carefully so as to leave a single narrow rib of the green intact all the way up the stalk, because that rib is the spine that will hold the light upright when the rest is dipped in fat. Then, when she had a good handful peeled, she laid them out on the boards inside to dry for a few days. When they were dry and light and pale, she took the iron cottage pot down to a low heat, put in the last of the winter's mutton fat or the drippings from the family's own bacon, and let the fat melt and sit at that particular temperature where it is liquid but not yet smoking. Then, one at a time, she dipped each peeled rush into the fat, lifted it out and stood it upright to cool and set in a rack of her own, contriving out of 2 pieces of wood with holes drilled through them. Once a rush was set, she dipped it again. 2 dips, sometimes 3, until the coat of fat on the rib was thick enough to burn. 100 rushlights could be made in a single evening if the family were willing to sit at it. A whole winter's light for the price of a summer afternoon in a meadow. That was the honest arithmetic of it. Gilbert White, the good gentle naturalist of Selborne in Hampshire, wrote a letter about it in November 1775. He was interested, as he was always interested in the small textures of country living. He weighed one of the best rushlights his village women made. It came out at 1/6 of an ounce, which is small enough that you would not feel it in the palm. He lit it, and let it burn to nothing and timed it. It gave, he wrote, 57 minutes of steady, soft light. 57 minutes for one dipped rush the weight of a small button. He did the further arithmetic. He worked out that a poor family in his village could have 5½ hours of light for a farthing, where a farthing tallow candle would give barely 1, so long as they were willing to gather the rushes themselves and use their own leftover fat. That figure of 57 minutes is what we are watching tonight. The rushlight on this table has been alight now for about 20 minutes. It has, if it burns, as White timed it, another 37 to give. It stands upright in a wrought iron holder made in the shape of a pair of pincers with a small foot that grips it firmly at the middle and lets it burn from the top down. The flame is small, smaller than a candle. It is orange in the middle and blue at its heart, and gives out a light that is enough, just, for the mother to see her darning stitches, and enough for the father to read 1 line at a time of the almanac, and enough for the smallest child on the settle to see the peg doll in her hand. It is not enough to read a difficult book by. It is not enough to see across the room. It is enough, that is all, and it costs almost nothing. At the far end of the mantel above the fire stands the tallow candle in its brass holder, kept in reserve for a Sunday, or for the reading aloud of a longer chapter of the Bible, or for the evening a neighbour comes in for a mug of small beer. Tallow is a step up from rushlight, an actual candle of moulded sheep or beef fat with a wick of twisted cotton at its core. It costs, in most decades of the 1800s, about 6pence for a pound, and the pound gives about 6 candles of the working sort, so a cottage may burn a farthing or a halfpenny of candle in an evening. A candle gives more light than a rushlight, 4 or 5 times over, but it costs, The mother uses the tallow candle only when she needs to. She uses the rushlight most nights. Later in the century, we should say, a third thing arrives on the cottage table: paraffin. In a small tin lamp with a chimney of clear glass, first in the better cottages in the 1860s, then in most cottages by the 1880s. The paraffin lamp is a brighter, steadier, warmer light than either the rushlight or the tallow candle, and when it comes it brightens the cottage evening by a whole magnitude. Old Mrs. Wells the widow, who lodges in the little chamber above this cottage, and who reads by rushlight even now because she was raised to save the tallow, will remember the first paraffin lamp that hung from the low beam in her sister's cottage in the 1870s, and she will remember thinking it was the sun come down inside. But we are earlier in the century here, and the light on the pine table is a rushlight, and it is the small warm point that holds all the small industries of the evening. The mother's darning basket is arranged so that whichever piece of work she's on comes close to that small light. The father sits on the settle at an angle from which the light falls across the print of the almanac. The eldest daughter, when she comes in from the yard in a moment, will bring her slate over and sit at the table where the light meets it and finish her lessons for the school in the parish room. 57 minutes. When the rushlight burns down to its holder, the mother will lift it out carefully so as not to burn her finger, tip it into the last hot coal of the fire so it does not burn on unattended, and take up another already dipped for tonight from the small pot she keeps at the back of the mantel. It is a small nightly ritual, a small quiet stopping and starting of the household's light. Nothing marks it. The dog does not lift his head. The child on the settle does not notice. It is just the way the evening is kept. And now the pot is beginning to breathe a little more heavily on its chain, and the mother is crossing to the fire to lift it forward. The work of getting supper on the table is starting. That is where we are going next. She has been on her feet most of the day. That is the plain fact of her. She was up at 5:30 to rake the fire and set the kettle, took the father his breakfast crib to the door before he went to the plough, walked into the parish for a pennyworth of salt at 9, brought back a jug of milk from the neighbour cottage where a cow was kept, washed a great heap of the family's shirts and hung them along the hedge to dry, brought them in when the rain looked like coming, brought them out again when the rain went off, laid the fire down and lit it fresh after dinner because it had been let too low, and went to the plot to lift a handful of leeks for tonight's supper. And every one of those things she did without thinking of it as a task. She did them the way we walk. Now she's at the fire and it is time for the pot. She lifts down the cottage pot from where it hangs on the chain, walks it 2 steps to the trivet, and rests it on the trivet for a moment while she sees to the fire. She adds 1 small piece of ash to the coals to bring the flame a fraction higher, works the poker under the log at the back once to shift the airway, then lifts the pot back and sets it on the chain a link lower so it will hang closer to the flame. The chain gives its small creak as she raises the hook. She has done this so many times that her hands know the exact link. The pot settles at the new height, 3 inches above the ash instead of 8, and within a minute it is starting to sing. The pot has been at a slow simmer since about 2 in the afternoon. 2 hours of quiet cooking. What is in it is the ordinary supper of an ordinary night. The bones of last Sunday's small joint of bacon, saved and dropped in this morning with a handful of the winter's dried peas and a good scoop of pearl barley. On top of that, in the last hour, a big turnip cut into rough cubes, 3 carrots cut down and half a cabbage roughly torn. On top of that, right at the last, the 4 leeks she brought in from the plot sliced fine. The whole pot smells now, if you lean toward it, of a warm, savoury, deep, patient thing that has been at work all afternoon. There is no cleverness in it. There is only time. She lifts the lid. The pot answers with a soft breath of steam that rises straight up into the ingle and is lost against the black brick. She takes the long wooden spoon down from its hook, stirs the pot slowly from the bottom, tastes off the back of the spoon, considers, and adds a small pinch of salt from the crock. She stirs once more. The barley has begun to soften into the broth and thicken it. The bacon bone has given up most of its fat. The whole pot is a thickened, savoury cottage soup of no particular name that will serve for the family supper tonight, and, warmed again tomorrow with a fresh handful of leek and a piece of yesterday's crust broken into it, will serve for the father's midday dinner tomorrow as well. Flora Thompson, remembering her Oxfordshire hamlet in the 1880s, wrote of exactly this hour and this motion, the pot slung onto its hook, and the smoke lifting from the chimney. That is what we are watching played out now. The lift of the pot, the shift of the chain, the settle of the pot at its new height, the first breath of steam. Every cottage in every hamlet in the English shires did that at that hour. 12 pots along this row are doing it now, at different heights, different broths, different mothers, the same warm sound, the same lift of steam into the same falling dusk. The mother stands back a moment, spoon in hand, and looks at what she's made. She looks at the pot the way somebody looks at a small work well done. Then she turns to the pine dresser, takes down 5 thick-handled cups, and lays them on the pine table beside the rushlight, checks the loaf under the cloth on the shelf, still enough for the evening, a fresh one tomorrow from the baker, takes down a small brown jug, and half fills it from the tap of the wooden barrel of small beer by the door for the father who will want it as soon as he sits, and sets it beside the cups. Then she takes down the tea caddy from its shelf, unlocks it with the small brass key on a ribbon at her waist, and measures 3 small pinches of tea into the brown teapot. The kettle is not yet at the boil. That is fine. The kettle will come to the boil about the time the father steps in. Everything is going into place around the fire without hurry. She has done this on this hearth on more nights of her life than she can count. 16 years of marriage, something above 4,000 evenings. Only about 8 of them, the 8 when the 2 youngest children were born, were evenings she was not the one at the fire and the pot. And even on those the neighbour who came in and made the supper made it more or less the same way, because the way is the way, and the pot on the chain at the trivet, and the leeks in last, and the tea in the caddy on the shelf, and the small brown jug of beer by the door for the father, are what the country evening arranges itself around wherever a family lives in England in this century. The pot on the chain and the kettle on the hob are both, in their small ways, singing now. The chain has settled and is silent. The mother comes across and sits for 1 whole minute on the settle beside the dog, not because she's tired, although she is, but because the pot is at the point where it will look after itself for the last quarter of an hour, and because if she does not sit for 1 whole minute now, she will not sit for 1 whole minute again until the father has been fed, and the children have been fed, and the smallest child has been carried up. She sits, her hands come to rest on her lap. The dog does not stir, but his tail moves twice against the tile. From the settle end, the smallest child watches her with the peg doll still upright. The fire breathes, the pot murmurs, the chain says nothing, the clock in the corner ticks, the rushlight burns steadily. The whole room, with the fire and the pot and the mother sat still and the child and the dog and the settle and the pine table and the rushlight, is exactly the picture the whole cottage evening is meant to be, held, ready, kept. And then the latch lifts, and the door opens, and the men are home. It is the father first, and after a moment his eldest son, a boy of 14 who works alongside his father on the same farm at a boy's wage, and behind them the eldest daughter, Sarah, aged 9, who has been at the neighbour's cottage helping with the neighbour's baby for the last of the afternoon. All 3 come in through the low door, and the room takes them. The father is a man of about 42, tall enough for his coat to strain slightly across the shoulders, brown in the face from a life outdoors, hair the colour of unwashed rope, eyes very light and very quiet. His name we may as well say now, since he's going to be with us all night. His name is William. He is a carter on the nearby farm of a man called Mr. Ashford, and his wage in a good year is 10 shillings a week, in an ordinary year 9, in a hard year 8. And out of that wage in most years he pays a shilling for the rent of this cottage, and a great deal for the flour that keeps the family in bread. He's been at his day's work since 5:30 this morning. He would like, in a very simple way, to sit down. He steps in. He bends slightly at the beam. He unbuttons his heavy working coat and hangs it on its peg. He crosses to the water bucket by the door, dips both hands into the cold, splashes his face once, rubs the water off with the rough towel that hangs beside the bucket, and stands a moment beside the door. Then he turns to the mother and gives her the very quiet nod that country husbands have always given country wives at this hour, and comes across the room and sits on the settle in his place, which is the end further from the dog, and looks straight at the fire and does not speak for 2 full minutes. The mother knows to leave him this. She does not speak either. She lifts the small brown jug of small beer from the table, brings it to him with a mug, and sets both by his hand on the settle arm. He nods once. He pours himself half a mug and drinks off half of that, and lets out one very quiet breath, and looks at the fire again, and the day begins, at last, to lay itself down for him. The eldest son is thin and long, at 14 the awkward age at which the arms are longer than the coat wants them to be. His name is Thomas. He has been on the farm alongside his father since he was 11. He earns 3 shillings a week, of which he gives 2 and 6pence to his mother without being asked, and keeps the 6pence for the small necessities of a boy's life. He hangs his coat on the peg beside his father's, dips his hands in the bucket, and being 14 and a boy, goes straight to the pot to see what is in it. The mother, without turning, tells him gently to sit down. He sits down at the far end of the pine table, on the stool the smallest child would have sat on had she been at the table, and folds his hands in his lap and waits. Sarah, the eldest daughter of the cottage at 9, comes in last because she has stopped in the yard to feed the 2 half-tame cats a scrap of yesterday's bacon rind she had wrapped in her apron pocket. She's a small, serious child with plain brown hair pulled back into a tight small plait, and the sort of exact, careful movements that come from being the eldest daughter in a busy cottage, and she has already, at 9, the habit of stepping into a room and glancing round to see what needs doing before she sits down. She glances round now. She sees the baby, sees the pot ready, sees her father sat, and comes across to the mother and stands quietly at her elbow, to be given something to do. The mother sends her to the shelf for the loaf and a cloth and a knife. Sarah brings the loaf on its wooden board across to the pine table, sets the board down carefully, cuts the loaf into thick, fair, even slices with the practised knife of a 9-year-old daughter, and lays them on a plate. The loaf was baked yesterday by the village baker in his brick oven at the top of the village, and cost the family 4pence, which is the ordinary price of a cottage loaf in these years. It is a big, honest loaf of the sort a family the size of this one eats through in 3 days. The crust is dark and thick. The crumb inside is soft. Now the wage stands behind everything on the table. Let us say the number, because it belongs. William earns 9 shillings a week in most years. That is what the country farm labourer of the 1800s earned across most of the century, dipping to 7 in a hard spring, rising to 12 or 14 only in the well-paid northern shires, or in the years after the union that Joseph Arch of Warwickshire began organising in 1872 brought a small extra shilling or 2 to the country labourer's wage. Of the 9 shillings, 1 goes to the rent of this cottage, 3pence to the vestry for the parish poor, 2pence to the parish coal fund, 6pence a week set aside for the boots and the shoes of the children by rotation, and the rest, 5 and 7, for the food and the fuel and the paraffin and the salt and the tea and all the small necessities the plot and the pig and the copper and the mother's hand cannot provide. It is not much. It is enough, on a night when the pot is full and the fire is holding, and on the nights it is not enough the mother, without ever making a scene of it, brews another gallon of small beer and puts a little less bacon in the pot, and the family eats what there is. But we are not on one of those nights tonight. Tonight the pot is full, and the loaf is on the board, and the tea is in the caddy, and the small beer is in the jug. The father on the settle, having sat his 2 minutes, is coming back to himself. He lifts his eyes to the mother. He asks after the smallest child. He asks after the neighbour's baby that Sarah has been minding. He asks how the parish clerk's wife is, who has been unwell. The mother answers in short sentences, without stopping her hands, which are now setting out the two-pronged forks with buckhorn handles on the table. 3 or 4 sentences of the day and no more. Country husbands and country wives in this century did not talk much and did not need to. They talked about specific things briefly, and then they were quiet again. In the quiet they were companion enough. The kettle on the hob comes to the boil with its small round shout. The mother lifts it off, pours a good stream of the hot water into the brown teapot, sets the teapot on the hob to draw for a couple of minutes, and puts the kettle back to the side. The room is now all smells at once, the deep patient smell of the pot's broth, and the sharp new smell of the tea coming up out of the pot, and the older constant smell of the fire, and faintly from the plate on the table, the fresh yeasty smell of the loaf. Somewhere in that combined smell is the country cottage of the 1800s itself, the whole 100 years of it kept. The mother crosses to the settle and lifts the youngest child, who has by now half fallen asleep, and carries her to the pine table, and props her carefully in a little wooden chair with a wooden bar across it, that is the smallest child's own place at the family table. The child rubs her eyes with her fists and looks around and settles. Thomas comes over from the stool. Sarah takes her place at the table with the practised confidence of the eldest daughter. William gets up from the settle at last, crosses the 4 feet of the ring, and takes his seat at the head of the table on a plain wooden chair, and the pot is lifted from the chain and brought across, and the meal begins. The cloth spread over the table is what Flora Thompson called the whitey brown cloth. She wrote the sentence exactly. When the men came home from work, she wrote, they would find the table spread with a clean whitey brown cloth, upon which would be knives and 2 pronged steel forks with buckhorn handles. That is the cloth on this table tonight. It is a length of coarse linen of the natural undyed colour of the flax, which is a kind of pale, creamy oatmeal, halfway between white and pale brown, hence the plain honest name. It was woven, in the years before the mother married in, at a farm nearby by a woman who took in linen weaving, and it has been washed and boiled and washed, and it is now soft to the hand and only a little worn along one edge where the corner has been folded 100 times. On a Wednesday or a Thursday evening, it is spread across the pine table for supper. On a Saturday night it is folded and put away, and a different cloth of true white, a wedding cloth given to the mother by her mother, is put on for Sunday. The mother lays the cloth carefully so that the crease down the middle sits exactly under the centre of the table, then smooths it out to the edges with the flat of her hands. Onto the cloth she sets the 2-pronged forks. There are 5 of them, 1 for each place. They are of black iron, with handles of buckhorn, that is, the horn of the domestic deer, polished dark from years of use. The mother's mother gave her these forks when she married in, and her mother before her had used them, and the forks are nearer 60 years old than 50. The knives are cheap plain iron with wooden handles and a rounded end. The plates are of a heavy off-white earthenware from a Staffordshire pottery, brought by a travelling salesman 5 years ago at 4p a plate. The spoons are pewter, softened at the edge from a decade of use. Between the places on the middle of the cloth stands a small brown crock of salt, a wooden butter dish with an inch of yellow butter from the neighbour cottage cow, a china cup of vinegar for the father who takes a spoonful of vinegar with his supper, and the loaf on its board where Sarah left it. Beside the loaf, at the corner near the mother's place, stands a smaller board with an 1.5 inch thick slab of the family's own bacon, cut down in the middle so that the 2 halves can be shared. The bacon on this table came off the family's own last pig, salted and smoked in the chimney of this cottage in October of the year before last, and hung in the muslin above your head as we came into the room. It is the deep pink meat and the wide white fat of a properly cured cottage bacon, a good farthing worth to a family of 6 for the evening. The mother sets the pot in the middle of the table. Its underside has burned a small round mark into the wood over the years, exactly the size of its base, but the cloth is under it now. The whole family are seated, William at the head, the mother at the other end, Thomas on the father's right hand, Sarah on the father's left. The smallest child in her wooden chair with the bar close beside the mother. William says, "Grace." It is a short country grace, the same one his father used before him. He says it quietly with his eyes on the table. Bless, Lord, we pray, this food to our use and us to thy service, and make us truly grateful for all thy mercies. Amen. The mother says amen after him. The children say amen after them. Sarah kicks her heels quietly against the leg of her chair once and stops. Then the pot is lifted, and the mother serves. She serves the father first. She fills his plate with a generous ladle of the thick broth, a good scoop of the barley, 2 or 3 good pieces of the bacon that has cooked in it, and a share of the softened turnip and carrot and cabbage and leek. She sets the plate down in front of him. He nods once and does not begin. She serves the 2 elder children next, plates a little less full, sets them down. She serves the smallest child last, a little bowl of the broth without the bigger pieces, and lays a piece of bread by her hand for dipping. She serves herself. Only when she's sitting and holding her own fork does William begin. That is his manner. He waits. They eat without speaking for the first 3 or 4 minutes. This is not coldness. This is hunger. Country men after 12 hours in the field are honestly hungry, and the meal in front of them is what the day was for. Then the eating slows, and William says a word or 2 to Thomas about the plough, and Thomas answers, and the mother asks Sarah about the neighbour's baby, and Sarah tells her that the neighbour's baby cut its first tooth today, and the mother says, "Very well done," and the mother reaches across to the smallest child and helps her dip her bread into her broth without dripping any. The evening's talk begins. It is unhurried and short in its sentences and gentle in its tone, and it makes no distinction between the small news, a tooth, a hedge trimmed, an egg found in a new place, and the greater, the price of flour at the mill, the vicar's plan for a new bell in the church, the rumour that a labourer from a neighbouring cottage might move to a factory in the north. All of it is the news of a life that is very small and very deep, and it is spoken across a table in a warm ring of firelight, while the pot cools slowly at the middle. There are no ceremonies of the meal beyond the grace and the waiting for the mother to be sat. There is no napkin. Country cottages of this century did not run to napkins. If a hand needs wiping, it is wiped on the leg of the trousers or the corner of the apron. There is no dessert. The meal is what it is. The end of the meal is when the plates are wiped clean with a piece of bread. There is no ceremony of leaving the table either. When the meal is done, the mother rises and begins to clear, and the children get down to their small evening work, and the father stays at the table with his mug of small beer for a further 10 minutes. And slowly the meal becomes the evening, and no one has said any word to make that happen. The knives and the forks and the plates go into the wooden bowl in the small stone sink under the pump, to be washed later. The pot is not moved. The pot stays where it is on the table, with the last third of its broth in it, because that broth is the father's cold dinner tomorrow. The mother covers the pot with a plate and sets it on the shelf above the fire, so that the warmth from the chimney will keep the broth from souring. The breadboard is scraped clean of crumbs into the fowl basin. The crumbs are for the hens in the morning. The cloth is shaken over the fire and folded and put away in the drawer of the pine dresser. The eldest daughter, Sarah, takes the smallest child, the low fireside stool, and sits her there with the peg doll and a piece of bread with a scrape of butter, and stays with her, and the smallest child chews slowly and watches the fire, and begins that particular soft drowsing children do in the ring of a warm hearth after supper. The eldest son, Thomas, fetches his slate, and sits at the pine table, where the rushlight throws its small warmth of yellow light, and starts on the sums the parish schoolmaster set him last Sunday. The father takes his mug and moves to the settle and stretches his feet out toward the fire. The mother, having cleared the last of the table, comes and sits for a moment beside him. Neither of them speaks. The room settles for the evening. That is the meal. That is how it ended without ceremony on a Wednesday night in an ordinary English country cottage in the 1800s. And that is where we are going next. To the mother's own particular quiet trade, the small beer brewed for a shilling. There is a copper set into the corner of the far wall of this room. You would not see it at first. It is behind a small wooden screen that the father made 10 years ago to keep the copper's coldness from the ring of the fire, and it is only pulled out when it's time to brew. On a brewing day the screen is folded aside, the copper is lit from beneath by a fresh small fire fed with sticks, and the cottage smells for a whole afternoon of hot barley and the sweet green smell of hops. Tomorrow is not a brewing day, the next brewing day is next Tuesday, but the copper is a permanent inhabitant of this cottage, and the small beer in the wooden barrel beside the door came out of it, and it is worth pausing on for a chapter. The copper is a great round tub of copper, riveted, holding 40 gallons full, set into a firebox of brick and iron below. The mother's father, who was a smith, gave it to her when she married in, and it was a bargain even then, and has paid for itself 10 times over in the years since. It is the mother's own particular kitchen trade. What she brews from it, most weeks, is what William Cobbett, writing his Cottage Economy in the year 1822, called small beer, the low-alcohol daily drink of the English cottage. Cobbett was, we should say, a man of some feeling for the country cottage. He wrote his Cottage Economy for the labouring man's family, and it was published in 1822, the year we are effectively looking at, and the book was carried in a great many cottages and set the pattern of what a labouring family might do to keep itself independent of the shop counter. On the subject of small beer he was insistent. Every cottage in England, he said, should brew its own, and it should not be a matter of luxury but of daily thrift, and he laid out the arithmetic in careful shillings and pence, and the arithmetic ran roughly to 3 gallons of a good small beer for the price of 1 shilling. 3 gallons for a shilling. Take an 8-bushel bag of malting barley from the parish farmer at a shilling, and 6pence the bushel. Take an ounce and a half of hops for the 2pence they cost. Take yeast that cost nothing, because the last brew always left a little back, and take the water that cost nothing at all from the pump on the village green, and the mother of the cottage, in an afternoon by her copper, can make 3 gallons of clean, warm, honest daily drink for a shilling. 3 gallons is a great deal. 3 gallons will keep a working family in daily beer for the best part of a week, and the small beer is drunk warm from a mug at breakfast, cold from a mug at midday, and cool from a mug at supper, and given to the children weak in warm water on cold mornings, and taken to the fields in a stone bottle for the men's crib, and served at the strength this cottage brews it, well below the strength of any bought ale, less indeed than most cider. Small beer of the cottage brewing was honestly safer than the water in most parishes, and warmer to the belly than water in any parish, and it kept the labouring man in his strength through the long field day. The mother's brewing day begins the evening before, when she puts the copper full of clean pump water on to warm slowly overnight beside the banked kitchen fire. In the morning she lights the small fire under the copper properly, brings the water to a good heat but not a boil, mashes in her bushel of cracked malt and lets it sit for 2 hours while the sweetness comes out of the barley into the water. Then she draws off the sweet wort into a wooden tub, adds the hops, brings it back to a boil in the copper for an hour, cools it in the tub for an evening, the whole cottage smelling of a warm bread like bittersweet air, pitches in a spoon of yeast from the last brew, covers the tub with a clean cloth, and leaves the brew alone for 2 or 3 days to work. On the 3rd day, when the working of the yeast is settled and the top is quiet, she taps the beer down into the wooden barrel that stands by the cottage door, seals the barrel with a good bung, and the small beer of the cottage is made. Everyone in the cottage helps. The father lifts the copper full of hot water because it is too heavy for the mother's hands alone. Sarah stirs the wort with the long wooden spoon while her mother measures the hops. Thomas at 14 shovels the sticks under the copper. The whole family knows the smell of the brew as an ordinary part of country domestic life, and the smell is one of the warmest of the cottage year. Cobbett said, and it is true that a cottage that brews its own beer is a cottage in charge of its own supper. There is no calling in at the beer shop on the way home. There is no going short of a mug at the end of a long day. There is no drunkenness of the desperate kind either, because a small beer of 2% will not do it, and the family who has always its own small beer in the cottage barrel is a family who does not need to seek stronger elsewhere. Cobbett was not sentimental. He was not a man who blessed the poor for their poverty. He was a plainer man than that. What he was an accountant of small independence, and the small independence of a home brewed daily beer at 3 gallons for a shilling was one of the sums he kept on his lips. Beside the copper stands a shelf, and on the shelf are the tools of the brewing: a wooden spoon 18 inches long, a copper skimmer with a long handle, a brass strainer of the mother's own contriving, worked one long winter evening from an old sheet of thin brass, a small brass measure cast in Sheffield, marked at 1/2 pint and a pint, a stone jar of the yeast starter kept sweet under the pump, a little linen bag of the hops she buys twice a year from a village woman who grows them behind her house, all of it kept ready, all of it in the same place year after year. Come away from the copper now. The screen goes back over the copper and the corner returns to its ordinary quiet. But by that door, at the level of the mother's hand, the wooden barrel of the last brew stands ready. It is about half full. It will last until Tuesday. The father's mug tonight came from it. The children's cup at breakfast tomorrow will come from it. The father's crib bottle for the field tomorrow midday will come from it. The whole rhythm of the cottage drinks is a mother's brewing day away. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled. The mother comes back to the settle and sits beside her husband. She takes up her darning basket. She takes out a woolen sock of Thomas's whose heel has worn a small hole. She threads a plain darning needle and begins. The evening's mending, that great long quiet trade of the country cottage, has begun. There is a small round wicker basket at the mother's feet now, and out of the basket the evening's work is coming. In the basket tonight there is a sock of Thomas's needing a heel darned, a smock frock of William's needing a small patch to the left elbow where a hedge caught him last week, a hem of Sarah's Sunday dress that has come undone, a piece of the smallest child's flannel petticoat with a torn edge, and a strip of new cloth the mother is turning into a sleeve for the eldest son's neck shirt. That is a slow evening's basket. On some evenings the basket holds twice as much. She starts with Thomas's sock. She turns the sock inside out over her fingers, spreads the whole out over the mushroom-shaped wooden darning egg her father made for her when she was a girl, and begins the darning stitch. First the warp threads, a long light straight running of thread across the whole, one after another, evenly spaced, tacking down to the good wool of the sock on either side of the hole. Then the weft threads, at right angles, over and under, the way a small loom weaves cloth. The result, when it is done, is a small neat square of new-made cloth built out into the hole, and if a sock is darned like that at the first sign of thinness at the heel, it will last another whole winter. The mother counts her stitches under her breath as she works. She is always counted. Country women who darned by low light through long winters learned to count so that the two sides of the darn would match without needing to be measured, and the counting became a small quiet rhythm of the mind that ran alongside the counting itself. 100 stitches to a heel is her old measure. She lays 100 stitches down as her warp, then 100 stitches over them as her weft. Her mother taught her 100, and her mother's mother had taught it too. If you sit close and listen, you can hear her breath make a small quiet count of it under her voice. The number's only just there, the softest of small work sounds in a room where all the sounds are small. Beside her the father has taken up his own trade of the evening. In front of him on the settle is a pair of Thomas's outgrown boots that have been passed to a neighbour's boy in the row and come back for a new sole because the neighbour's boy has already worn the previous sole through. The father has a small piece of harness leather cut down to a sole shape, a set of copper tacks, a small hammer with a curved head, and a bradawl. He works the harness leather on his knee, taps in the tacks one at a time with a small even beat, softens the edge of the leather with a piece of moistened wax he keeps in a tin, and puts the boot down and starts on the other. His father was a cottage cobbler as well as a labourer, and cottage men learned young to keep the household in shoes. A cottage sole cost, if the leather was of a bought sort, 6pence to a boot, and lasted, if it was well laid, a couple of winters. On leather scavenged from an old harness at the farm as tonight, it cost nothing at all. Sarah is at the pine table still with a slate. She has washed the sum from earlier off with a corner of her apron, and is copying a piece of writing off a printed handbill her mother pinned up for her, an old parish notice about a fair 4 Christmases ago. Sarah is copying it in a careful joined hand with her slate pencil, and every now and then she pauses to look up at the notice, mouth moving quietly with the shape of the word she's copying. The slate pencil makes a small scratchy sound against the slate, another small quiet sound in the room. Thomas at the far end of the settle is whittling. He has a piece of ash the size of his forearm and a small pocket knife of English, make his father gave him for his last birthday, and he is turning the piece of ash slowly by degrees into a butter paddle for his mother. He has been at it for a week of evenings. Tonight he is on the shaping of the handle. His hands are careful and slow. He does not talk. Somewhere in about 6 evenings' time he will hand the finished paddle to his mother, and she will hold it in one hand and turn it and pronounce it a good shape, and she will use it for the rest of her life. That paddle will still be in the cottage kitchen when Sarah at 9 is a woman of 50. The smallest child has fallen asleep now at the fireside stool. Sarah gets up quietly without being asked, and lifts her sister into the settle beside the mother, curls her in against the mother's side, tucks a piece of flannel over the child's legs. The child does not wake. The mother, without looking up from her darning, moves her elbow a small distance so that her sister's head can rest against her side. The counting of the stitches goes on. There is a very small warm sound of a child's sleeping breath in the ring of the fire now, added to all the other small sounds, and the sound is the sound the whole cottage evening was built to hold. 15 minutes go by in this way. The fire has settled. The pot on the shelf above the hearth is barely warm now. The kettle mutters at its edge. The clock in the corner ticks its slow tock, and the rushlight burns steadily. The mother finishes her 100 and starts her second 100, over the first at right angles. A darn is a small warm thing to sit next to. It is not fine work, and it is not delicate, and it is not, in the way that lacework or embroidery is, ornamental. It is the plain, honest making again of a piece of cloth, in the very same wool of the cloth it repairs, so the wearer will not know for weeks that the sock has been mended at all, until in some further winter the darn itself begins to wear, and the mother darns the darn. Country women mended everything. They mended the sheets at the middle where they had begun to give, turning them side to middle, cutting them down the centre, sewing the outer edges together, hemming what had been the middle of the sheet as the 2 new outer edges, so that the least worn cloth was moved to where the heaviest wear was, and the most worn cloth was rehemmed to the edge where the wear was least. They mended the shirts 100 small ways, at the collar, at the cuff, at the underarm. They cut up worn adult clothes into fresh smaller ones for the children. They made the rag rug that lies beside the settle out of the cloth that could no longer even be mended. They kept a cottager's cloth alive as long as any cloth could be kept alive, and only when a piece of cloth had been through everything, the shirt to the child's shirt to the pillow, slipped to the dust cloth to the rag rug, did it finally cease to be cloth at all. Nothing goes to waste in the cottage. That is the deep, sober, cheerful principle of the mother's mending basket. Every thread has an errand, and every scrap has a place, and the evening's small trade of needle and knife is how the whole cottage stays whole. The father lays down the mended boot. He looks at his wife's darning of the sock, notes without saying that she is on to her second 100, and reaches for the second boot. Sarah at the table has finished her copying and is standing up to bring her slate to her mother for inspection. Thomas has laid down the ash and is drinking off the last of his mug of small beer. And here, at the moment when everyone in the room is warmly, quietly at work and the child is asleep against the mother's side, the father clears his throat, in the small countryman's way of clearing a throat when he is going to be asked to read. The mother reaches to the small shelf on the wall beside the settle, without looking up from her stitches, and takes down a small brown book and passes it to her husband. It is the parish almanac for the year, or in most years it is the almanac, and on some Sundays it is the Bible instead. Tonight it is the almanac. It is a small paper-covered book of about 100 pages, printed cheaply on rough paper, bound in a brown card cover printed with the year and a small woodcut of a plough. It costs 6pence at the market town. It comes fresh each January and holds the whole year's weather signs and the faces of the moon and the tide tables for the coast, which are of no immediate use to a family 30 miles inland, but are pleasant to know. The parish feast days and the market days of the nearest towns, and the fair days and the hiring fairs at Michaelmas and Martinmas, and, in a middle section, a chapter or two of general reading, an account of a distant country, an account of a strange animal, an account of a great man in a plain style, a page of proverbs, a page of country weather sayings, a page of household hints. William reads slowly. He learned his letters at a parish Sunday school when he was 8, and he learned them well enough, and he has kept his reading alive all his life by reading exactly this way: an evening of the almanac, an evening of the Bible, a paragraph of a letter, the parish notices at the church door on Sundays. He is not a fast reader. He reads with his finger on the line, and he reads aloud slightly slower than he would read to himself, and every so often he pauses on a word he is not sure of and studies it, and the mother listening will supply the word if she knows it, and if she does not know it either, the two of them will make the best of it, and William will move on. There is no shame in his slow reading, and there is no shyness. Country cottages of the 1800s are full of adults who read slowly and honestly and love the pages they turn. He opens tonight on the middle general section. He reads a paragraph of an account of the country of Egypt, a very short and very plain paragraph about the yearly flooding of the great river and how the mud left behind grows the corn for the country. He reads it carefully. Sarah, having brought her slate over, sits on the floor at his feet and listens with her chin in her hand. Thomas at the settle end pauses in his whittling. The mother does not stop her darning, but her needle moves a little more slowly. The smallest child is asleep, and hears nothing but sleeps into the sound of her father's voice, which is a warm rumble under her cheek. When he is done with the paragraph on Egypt, William turns to the page of country weather sayings and reads 3 or 4 of them. If Candlemas be fair and bright, winter will have another flight. If Candlemas Day bring cloud and rain, winter is gone and will not come again. Between Christmas and Candlemas, look for a rusty axe, and the plough will find you. Sarah repeats one of them under her breath, memorizing. The mother nods once at another, agreeing with it out of a lifetime of watching her own weather. The father closes the almanac at last, marks his page with a length of straw, and lays the book aside. Then he takes down from the shelf the family's Bible. It is a plain black leather-bound edition of the 1850s, cheap from a Bible society given to William and the mother by the parish clergyman when their first child was baptized. Its cover is soft with much handling. Its edges are gilt and dulled. He opens it and turns to a psalm and reads a psalm. He reads Psalm 121, the one about lifting up the eyes to the hills, and he reads it slowly and straight through, without inflection, and the words come out in the plain rhythm of the King James Bible, which is the deep old rhythm of English prose. When he is done, he closes the book and lays it down on the mother's basket. Nobody speaks for a moment. Then the mother says quietly to Sarah, "Sing us your school hymn now," and Sarah, without shyness, she is a country child and singing aloud is not a foreign thing to her, begins in her small clear alto the hymn her schoolmaster has been teaching them, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. She sings it a little slowly, exactly as her schoolmaster teaches it. The mother, still darning, joins in on the second verse, in a low, warm voice that is used to singing at church. Thomas at 14 is at the age when boys will not sing at home even if you ask them, and does not join, but he watches his sister and his mother with a small quiet fondness in his eye. The father hums the tune, not the words. The smallest child sleeps. Old Mrs. Wells, the widow, up in her chamber above, hears the hymn through the floorboards and hums along without knowing she's doing it. She would have been a young woman when Joseph Ashby of Ticey was a boy. Joseph Ashby was born on the 10th of November in the year 1859 in Ticey in Warwickshire, a farm labourer's boy, later a smallholder and a Methodist local preacher, and his daughter Mabel Ashby wrote his life in the year 1961 in a book that has become the great record of a rural cottage boyhood in this century. In the pages of that biography, Mabel Ashby remembers her father as a boy at his mother's scrubbed pine cottage table in Ticey, reading Cobbett by the light of a rushlight. That is a real record, a named person, a real cottage. Joseph Ashby of Ticey, we may as well say his name out gently, was one of the country boys reading Cobbett by rushlight at his mother's kitchen table in the middle of this century, and the cottage that raised him was a cottage very like the one we are inside now. The pinned settlement certificate hangs on the wall by the door. Every cottage of the parish has one. It is a small piece of paper certifying that this family belongs, in the terms of the old parish poor law, to this parish, and that if they should fall into destitution, this parish is the parish that will take them back and give them a piece of parish relief. It is a small ordinary paper. Nobody in the family thinks about it much, but it is there, pinned into the whitewash beside the door, a quiet legal record of the family's belonging. The father, at last, closes the Bible and stretches slightly against the back of the settle. The mother sets down her darning at the point in the third quarter of the sock, where she has done her 100 and started her second 100, and takes up her cup of tea, which has by now cooled to the just warm temperature at which she likes it, and drinks. Thomas takes up the piece of ash again and turns it slowly in his fingers, considering where to take the next shaving off. Sarah sits at the fire with her back against the settle and puts her head against her mother's knee. Old Mrs. Wells above them turns a page of her own small book. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled. And now let us widen the frame gently, and hear the same cottage across the seasons of the year, so that we know how this same room holds a spring evening, and a haytime evening, and a harvest evening, and an autumn evening, and a winter evening. Because the cottage of the 1800s is not one evening, it is a whole year of them, and that is where we are going next. Let us change the season, not the room exactly. The same fire, the same beams, the same rag rug, the same mother at her stitches, but move the calendar back 4 months to a late April evening, and the door of this cottage stands open. It stands open onto the plot behind the cottage. That plot, a quarter of an acre of dark, good rural loam, is what has kept this family in vegetables for the year. Every cottage in the row has one like it. They run out from the back of each cottage in narrow strips, hedged from each other by low quickset, ending at a further hedge that bounds the whole row against the ploughland beyond. In each plot is a little pigsty in the far corner, a small chicken run against the back hedge, a compost heap of the year's leaves and vegetable trimmings, and between them the beds of the vegetable garden, laid out in the plain long rows of country husbandry. On a spring evening the plot is where the family lives. The father is out first, still in his working coat, forking over the ground for a further planting of potatoes. Sarah is behind him with a small basket, dropping a potato eye into each hole. The mother is at the far end kneeling on a piece of sacking, thinning a row of young lettuces so gently you would not know she was pulling any out at all. Thomas is at the pigsty with a bucket, giving the pig the last of the day's peelings. The smallest child sits on a low three-legged stool at the door in a small woolen jacket, watching an early butterfly that has come out of nowhere onto a young dandelion, and trying to say the word butterfly. The air is different. In a spring evening the air is soft and light, and the smells are of the young hedge, and the just-turned earth, and from an open cottage door at the other end of the row somebody boiling nettles for a spring green. The birds are singing hard still past their bedtime because the light has held. In April the days lengthen by 3 minutes every day, and this hamlet is now in the season when the door can stand open till nearly 8, and the family can be outside a full 3 hours after the men come in. The plot is what the cottage year turns on. Cobbett, again, wrote of the plot with an accountant's admiration. A quarter of an acre well kept, he said, is worth more to a labouring family than an extra shilling a week from a farmer. and he set down what a quarter of an acre could carry: a bed of potatoes for 3 months of eating, a bed of cabbages for winter greens, onions plaited into strings and hung from the kitchen beam, carrots and parsnips and turnips for the cottage pot, a plot of dried peas for the winter stew, a bed of leeks, a small patch of herbs by the door for the cooking, thyme and rosemary and marjoram and mint and sage, a strip of rhubarb by the far hedge for the mother's spring cordial, a few red currant bushes at the back for the summer jam, a row of gooseberries against the wall, and if the plot ran to it, 1 apple tree in the middle for the autumn apples and a row of gooseberries against the wall. This family's plot runs to all of them. The apple tree is the oldest thing in the plot. It was planted, the story goes, by the mother's great-grandfather, and it is now a thick-trunked, moss-lichened old grandfather of a tree with a fine wide crown that in a good year gives 4 bushels of small sharp cottage apples for the winter stores. In April it is just past its blossom, and the ground under it is white with fallen petals, and a hen has settled on the drift of petals as if the drift were a pond of white water. The mother finishes her thinning of the lettuces and stands up and brushes the earth off her apron. She takes the basket of lettuces, tender young leaves the size of a child's ear, to the door of the cottage, sets it inside and comes back out with a large tin can of water she has drawn from the yard pump. She waters the row of lettuces with a small measured stream from the can, holding the can low so as not to bruise the young leaves. Then she moves to the row of onions which are just showing green, and lifts a stone that has half fallen onto one of them, and settles the earth over the small green shoot. The father finishes his potato bed. Sarah, having dropped the last of the potato eyes into the last hole, stands up and stretches like her father, and gives him a very small serious nod. He nods back. He shoulders his fork and comes across to the mother and asks if she needs the water can filled again, and she says yes, and he takes it back to the pump. Thomas gives the pig the last of the peelings and comes back up the plot and stands beside his father at the pump, and they turn the handle together, and the water splashes into the can. There is nobody's voice raised. There is only the plain sound of a plot at its evening work. The evening in the plot lasts until the sun is only just still above the hedge to the west. Then the mother says gently that she needs the small child in for her supper, and the family come indoors slowly, one by one, boots at the door, apron off, hands washed at the leather bucket. The fire, which has been let to a very low glow all afternoon because it is warm outside, is coaxed up with a fresh stick of ash. The pot, which was already at its simmer with a lighter spring soup of green peas and the first young onions, is moved forward on the chain. The rushlight is not yet needed. There is enough light from the sky at the window for an hour more, and only at 9 does the mother reach up and light the rushlight and set it on the pine table and draw the door quietly closed against the last blue of the outside. Once the door is closed, the cottage evening of April is almost the same cottage evening of December. The same settle, the same fire, the same mother darning, the same father reading the almanac. The season had been outside all afternoon. The season comes in through the smell of the young onion in the pot and the faint bruised smell of the fresh lettuce on the shelf. But the whole small architecture of the ring of the fire, and the pot, and the light and the pine table is set the same, and the family drift toward bed at the same hour, only carrying with them the small extra tiredness of the extra hours of light. And the year turns, and the meadows are calling. That is where we are going next, to a haytime evening. Now move the calendar forward to a Saturday in mid-June. Haytime. The whole parish is in the meadows. Haytime in the 1800s was the great early summer work of the country year. From about the second week of June, if the weather held, until into July, every parish that had a meadow was in it. The grass had been standing since May, growing thick and green and tall, dotted through with the little wildflowers the meadows of England used to carry in profusion, buttercup and ox-eye daisy and clover and vetch and yellow rattle, and, if the meadow was old and gentle, 100 smaller things. When the grass was long enough to lay down cleanly under the scythe, and dry enough not to ferment in the stack the parish farmers set the day, And on the day every hand in the parish who could hold a rake or turn a fork went to the meadows, because hay in the barn was the winter feed of every horse and cow in the country, and a wet week during hay-time was the shape of a bad winter. William is out with a rake since 6 in the morning. Not a mowing man tonight. The scythes are ahead of him, 6 of them in a row, working the long, slow arc of the scythe stroke across the top of the meadow, but a raking man turning the fresh-cut grass to the sun on his fork so it dries even. Thomas at 14 is with him with a smaller rake. The mother is out with the other women, working the hay from the drying rows into the small conical stacks the country called cocks, so that if a shower came the hay would shed the rain. Sarah at 9 is out with the older cottage children with a small water can, bringing water to the workers and a basket, and picking up the loose scattered hay that the rakes had missed and heaping it into the cocks. Even the smallest child of the cottage is out, in her mother's arms for a stretch of it, and then set down in a shaded corner of the meadow to sit and watch, and given a small posy of vetch and clover to hold. It is a long, dry, hot day. The country in mid-June is at its most beautiful and its most demanding at the same time. The men mow in shifts, resting under the shade of a hedge with a mug of small beer from the parish farmer's stone jar, then coming back to the scythe. The women rake and cock the hay through the day. The children run water and pick up hay and lie down at intervals in the shade of a hedge. By 6 in the evening the whole parish is tired the way an entire body is tired, and the sun is beginning to slant down the western sky, and the meadow is dotted with the finished cocks of hay standing at even intervals down its length. At about 7:30, the parish farmer, whose meadow it is, walks the length of the meadow with a hand raised, and calls out that the day is done. There is a small quiet cheer. Rakes are laid down, scythes are set upright at the hedge. The parish farmer's wife, who has been in the farm kitchen all day with 2 other women, appears at the head of the meadow with a great wooden tray on which stand 2 large loaves of new bread, a pat of butter, a whole cottage cheese, a jug of small beer, and a plate of cold sliced bacon. And this is the parish farmer's tea to the workers, a country custom of haytime given every year without fail. The workers gather at the head of the meadow. They eat standing. There is a small, honest talking. There is no formality. Then, in 2s and 3s and small family groups, the workers start for their cottages. The sun is not yet down, will not be down for a further half hour, and the whole hamlet is walking the lane home in the golden long light of a June evening. Cottages ahead of them lit up warm on their pale walls, the smoke from the chimneys thin and blue, the swallows above darting for insects in the still warm air. William and Thomas and the mother and Sarah and the smallest child come down the lane together. They are all in their working things. William's shirt is white with dust and marked with the green of the grass, and his sleeves are rolled to the elbow. The mother's face is faintly reddened by the sun she is not used to, and there is a piece of hay caught in the ribbon of her cap. Sarah is carrying the smallest child on her hip, and the smallest child is asleep against her shoulder. Thomas has his sleeves rolled and his hair pushed back, and a small blister at the base of his thumb, which he does not mind because it has come from a day of good work. They come to the door of the cottage and step in, and the room takes them. The kitchen has not been made up all day. There is no pot on the chain. There is no rushlight lit. The fire has been kept at a very low glow all day, tended once by old Mrs. Wells the widow, who stayed at home because her legs are not what they were and she was of no use in the meadow. She has laid out on the pine table a supper of bread and cold bacon and a small jug of small beer, and the last of the mother's preserved gooseberries in a bowl and a length of yesterday's cheese. That is tonight's supper. It is a hay-time supper. It is eaten cold because the fire has been kept low to spare the fuel on the longest days of the year, and it is eaten in the garden if the family is still hungry enough to sit up. And on this evening the family carries the supper out on the wooden tray to the small patch of grass at the back of the cottage, and sits on the low stone wall between the plot and the yard and eats. The father takes 2 shillings extra a week during haytime weeks. It is the standing rate, 11 shillings for the week instead of 9. Those 2 shillings, when the hay is in, and the wage is paid on Saturday, go straight into the mother's kitchen tin, and out of them will come a new pair of boots for Sarah come Michaelmas, and a small extra allowance of tea for the tea caddy for the summer. Nobody speaks of it. It is understood. They eat slowly. Nobody has enough energy tonight for talking. The smallest child sleeps against her sister's shoulder throughout. The father drinks off his mug of small beer and lifts the small child gently from Sarah and carries her indoors to the cot. The mother and Sarah come indoors after him. Thomas stays a little longer at the wall looking at the hedge, tired. By 9:30, in the failing light of a long June evening, the family are in. The rushlight is lit. The pot is not moved. The fire is banked earlier than any other night, because the day was so long and everybody's asleep on their feet, and by 10 o'clock, an hour earlier than usual, the whole family, William included, is going up the stair. William is asleep before he reaches the chamber. The mother, having laid the youngest into the truckle bed and Sarah into hers, sits for 2 minutes at the top of the stair against the wall in the dark and rests her palm against the whitewash which is warm from the day, and comes into bed. The fire is holding. The kettle is at rest. The house is settled. And the year turns to the great social evening of the country round, harvest. Move the calendar forward again to an evening in late August. The corn is in. The last field of wheat on the parish farmer's land was cut and stacked on Friday, and Saturday night is the harvest home, the biggest social evening of the country year. Harvest home was the parish's own festival. It had no church calendar behind it, and no pinning down in the parish book, but it was in its bones the older festival of the country year, the year's greatest work done, the corn stacked, the risk of the weather past. In some parishes the parish farmer put on a supper in his barn for all the workers, but in this hamlet, which is small, and where the parish farmer is a plain man of small ways, the harvest home is done cottage by cottage, or in small clusters, and the cottages on this row are gathering tonight at the middle cottage in the row, which has the biggest garden and a small paved yard behind it. The middle cottage is the one where the widow Mary Pierce lives with her 2 grown daughters and their small children. Mary Pierce is a woman of about 50, thin and quick, with a small dry laugh and a great long memory for the parish's songs. She has swept the yard clean. She has brought out 4 wooden benches, borrowed one from each cottage on the row. She has drawn up the parish's biggest table into the middle of the yard. She has hung from a hook at the corner of the eaves an old iron lantern that once belonged to her husband before he died, in which a tallow candle is now lit, so that when the light goes, the yard will have a soft, warm point of light hanging above it. 3 families are here, 3 sets of parents, 5 older children between them, 3 smaller. Our cottage is here in full. William and the mother and Thomas and Sarah and the smallest child, and old Mrs. Wells, the widow up on the settle indoors, who came in with her sewing but keeps an ear on the yard through the open kitchen door. The mother has brought a plum cake. The plum cake is the mother's harvest offering. She saved for it. A whole shilling out of the hay-time money went into a small pot on the shelf back in June, and she has bought her currants and her sugar and her spice over the summer with it. And this morning she was up early to bake the cake in the small wall oven of the cottage. It is a heavy, dense country plum cake, dark with treacle, full of currants, and it stands now on a wooden board in the middle of the table, wrapped in a clean linen cloth, ready to be cut. On the table, too, is a great cottage loaf, and Mary Pierce's own soft crumbly cheese, and a large brown jug of the small beer of one of the other cottages, and Mary Pierce's own damson preserve in a stoneware pot, and, at the very corner, a small brown teapot for the older women who prefer tea to beer. The children are running. The old dog from our cottage has come with the family and has met in the yard Mary Pierce's smaller collie, and they have decided to be friends for the evening. The smallest child of our cottage is on her sister's lap, wide awake and watching everything. The men, William and the other 2 fathers, are standing against the low wall talking about the yield of the wheat, and the price the parish farmer expects to get for it at Michaelmas, and about whether the pig prices will hold at Salisbury this autumn. Their voices are low. The women, our mother and Mary Pierce and the other two mothers, are at the table pouring, cutting, laying out. It is not a fine evening's set piece. It is a country cottage evening on a paved yard under a slowly softening summer sky. Then, at about 8 o'clock, when the light is just going, the singing begins. Mary Pierce carries the songs of this parish in her head. She is one of the last women in the country in the 1800s who does. Some of them go back 150 years, sung to her by her grandmother, who had them from her grandmother. Others are newer. Some of them are known in this parish only, and some of them are known in every parish in the south of England. She starts with one of the old ones tonight, a song for the corn cut in, a slow, steady ballad in an ancient country tune, and she sings it in a small, dry alto that is not a fine voice by any modern reckoning, but is a true voice for the song. The other women come in at the chorus quietly. The men do not sing, but they stop their talking against the wall and listen. It is one of the old ballads the parish has kept for 150 years, a song of the harvest home, of the corn safe in the barn, and the labour of the year rewarded with a warm mug and a warm bed. The mother of our cottage, singing softly to the tune she has known since her own childhood in a neighbouring hamlet, comes in on the harmony, and her voice and Mary Pierce's voice fold in against each other, and the yard in the deepening blue evening is a quiet, gentle sound of two country women singing a very old song about the corn being in. The song ends. Nobody claps. That is not the way. There is a short, warm silence, and then the plum cake is cut, and mugs of small beer are poured, and the tea is poured for those who want it, and the harvest evening moves on into the middle of itself. More songs come, some slower, one or two later on faster, and the older children, who at 9 and 10 and 11 are learning the songs from their mothers by hearing, join in on the choruses. Thomas, at 14, being of the age when boys do not sing, sits on the wall beside his father and listens. The smallest child of our cottage has fallen asleep against Sarah's shoulder by 9 o'clock, and Sarah carries her indoors to the settle where old Mrs. Wells is sitting, and lays her there, and stays a moment stroking her hair, and comes back out. By 10 o'clock the plum cake is gone, and the small beer is nearly gone, and the yard is beginning to feel the cooler air of after dark. The lantern hanging from the eaves is the only light now, its soft, warm circle of yellow lighting the wooden table and the faces around it. The men have moved to the wall to sit rather than stand. The women are at the benches. Somewhere in the yard a child has been left asleep on a folded shawl. At about 10:30 the parents begin to bring the evening in. The children asleep are picked up. The rugs are folded. The plates and the mugs are gathered onto the wooden tray to be washed in the morning. The families take their leave of Mary Pierce with a hand pressed to hers and a word of thanks. Our family walks the short distance back to our own cottage, William carrying the smallest child now, Sarah carrying the empty cake board, the mother carrying the small brown teapot she had lent for the evening. They come in. The fire is very low, the pot is not moved. The kitchen smells faintly of the plum cake still on the mother's hands. The children are put straight to bed. Old Mrs. Wells is already asleep in her chair on the settle and is helped up the stair by the mother to her chamber. The parents follow, and by 11 the whole cottage, the whole row of cottages, the whole hamlet is dark. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled, and the year turns, and the leaves are down. Move the calendar forward once more to a Thursday evening in late October. The trees are down to the last brown of their leaves. The mornings have frost. The fields are ploughed and dark. The lane you came down at 4 in the afternoon is bordered now by hedges heavy with the last of the sloes and the hips. Rooks are still coming home, but earlier now, black lines against a sky that is red at the west by 5 in the afternoon. The plot has been mostly cleared. The onions are up, pleated into strings, and hang from a beam in the kitchen. The potatoes are up and stored in a wooden crate in the corner of the cellar under a piece of hessian. The apples of the old tree are picked and lie in a wooden trug by the door, sharp small cottage apples, some already going a little wrinkled at the skin that will feed the family for 4 months. The cabbages that are still in the ground will stand another 2 months sweetening in the frost. At the door as you come in stands the trug of apples, and alongside it a wooden crate of the year's cider apples, which are for the mother's little autumn ritual of small cider. Beside the crate, on a shelf, is a stone jar of the year's damson gin, dark ruby-coloured, which the mother made from the sloes on the hedge in September and will save for Christmas. Above your head, hanging fresh from a beam in the middle of the kitchen, is the year's bacon flitch. That is the year's great household event, and it happened yesterday. Yesterday the family pig, which had been feeding in the accessi at the corner of the plot since March, was ready. He had come from the parish farmer as a small piglet at 8 shillings, been fed all summer on scraps from the kitchen, potato peelings, cabbage stumps, whey from the neighbour's cheese-making, the odd bucket of turnip trimmings, and pot boilings, and by October had grown from the 8 stone he came in at to a good 15 stone of muscle and fat. Yesterday a man from the parish came with his knife and his rope, and did the necessary work in the yard behind the cottage, quickly and cleanly, in the way it has always been done, and the mother and Mary Pierce from the middle cottage cut and butchered the pig on the kitchen table through the afternoon, and every part was put to some use, and by evening the 2 great sides of bacon had been rubbed with salt and left in a shallow trough to draw the moisture out. Tonight, a further day later, the salted sides have been washed and rubbed with a mixture of the mother's own dry cure, salt and brown sugar and a small measure of the family's saved bacon rind fat, and hung from the beam in the middle of the kitchen in a length of clean muslin. There they will stay for 6 weeks, curing in the gentle smoke of the fire that rises past them into the chimney. By early December they will be the year's bacon, ready to cut down slice by slice for the winter's suppers. The kitchen tonight is a kitchen of the season's stores, the onions plated on the beam, the flitch newly hung in its muslin, the apples in the trug, the stone jar of damson gin, the crate of cider apples, the potatoes below in the cellar, the pat of butter given as a Michaelmas gift by the parish farmer's wife, the cheese wrapped in cloth on the shelf. A very good year, honestly reckoned. Not every year is like this, but this year has been a good one, and the kitchen looks it. The mother is at the stove tonight boiling elderberries. She picked them last week at the edge of the parish wood, 4 pints of them, and she is boiling them slowly with sugar and a good spike of cloves to make her elderberry cordial. The cordial will be poured into small stoneware bottles and stopped with a cork sealed in wax, and the whole family will have it through the winter as the mother's small medicine, hot in a mug against a cold, sweet against a cough. It is not a strong medicine, it is a warm medicine. The whole cottage smells tonight of the elderberry and the clove, a smell that in this row of cottages means October and November, and the winter coming. The father is at the door of the plot with a small axe splitting kindling from a stack of hazel he cut down a fortnight ago. He's splitting it into lengths the length of his forearm, small enough to go into the fire quickly of a morning without having to be broken further. The stack of kindling by the door has grown by nightfall from an armful to a great pile that will last a fortnight of mornings. He works in the last light, in a rhythm of small dry chops, and every 3rd or 4th chop the split length flies away into the pile with a small dry clatter. Thomas is beside him with the log basket, gathering the fallen lengths, stacking them by size against the wall. Sarah is at the settle with the smallest child on her lap, and she's peeling a small apple with a paring knife for her sister. She peels the apple in one long unbroken green skin, the way her mother taught her, and lets the peel drop into a small saucer for the mother's cordial. Nothing goes to waste, even the apple peel has a home. The smallest child watches the peel come off the apple with the same rapt attention she gave to the butterfly in April, and when Sarah cuts the apple into small dice she pops one gently into her sister's mouth, and the whole small solemn arrangement of the 2 of them on the settle is one of those small tender pictures of the country cottage of the 1800s that no photograph ever caught but 100 diarists remembered. Old Mrs. Wells the widow is at the pine table with a piece of white flannel. She's cutting patches for a new patchwork quilt, working with a pair of shears, laying the cut squares carefully into rows on the table. It is winter's work, the mother's autumn medicine coming to the boil beside her, the father splitting kindling in the last light, the eldest daughter peeling an apple, the youngest child asleep on the settle, all of it happening under the newly hung flitch and the plaited onions and the drying herbs. By 6 o'clock the light is gone. William comes in with the last split of kindling, hangs his coat and takes his mug of small beer. The supper tonight is a simple one, a pot of the last of the mother's tomato and marrow stew from the last of the plot, thickened with a spoonful of oatmeal and the loaf and a wedge of the cheese. Grace, the eating, the clearing. Then the small industries of the evening begin again in their season's shape. The mother is at her cordial, and later at her darning. The father reads the parish gazette that came in from the market town on Wednesday, an article about the parish farmer's late brother who has died and left the parish an endowment for a further half-acre of poor land. Thomas whittles at the ash paddle, which is now nearly the shape of a butter paddle. Sarah does her lessons at the pine table. Old Mrs. Wells folds her patchwork squares into a bundle and sets them in the pine dresser drawer for tomorrow. The rushlight burns steadily on the pine table. By 9 the cordial is done, poured warm into 8 small stoneware bottles and corked and set to cool on the shelf. The smell of elderberry and clove is at its warmest and roundest in the room. The mother sits down for the first time in an hour and drinks half a mug of small beer and sighs one small honest sigh. The bacon flitch hangs above her head in the smoke of the fire, curing slowly through the night. The parish clock strikes 9:30. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled, and the year turns and the cold is at the shutters. Move the calendar to the deep of December. A Wednesday night. The wind is up. It has been blowing since before dawn, a northeasterly wind bringing with it the first serious cold of the winter, and by 4 in the afternoon the frost has set invisibly on the panes of the small deep-set windows, ferning at the corners, thickening as the evening goes on, so that by 9 o'clock the panes will be white with an inch of ice on their inside surface, ferned and starred and delicate. The door of the cottage is not open tonight. The heavy door bar is dropped into place at 4 in the afternoon, and it will not be lifted again until 6:30 tomorrow morning. The great cold has come. Country cottages on a night like this are not places for the door to be opened. Every crack of the door frame has been packed a fortnight ago with a strip of felt cut from an old worn-out working coat. The chimney has been swept and its low aperture into the room stuffed with rags around the chain to stop the downdraft. The small deep-set windows have been latched tight, and a piece of thick calico has been pinned across each of them on the inside to break the cold air off the pane. The fire is not a small fire tonight. The mother has built it up. There are 2 thick oak logs on it. The chain is at a slightly higher hook, so the pot is not directly in the flame. The fire flame is at least 6 inches high, which is a taller flame than any other night we have seen, and it throws a strong warm light out across the ring of the 4 feet. And beyond the 4 feet the room is still cold. The whole family is inside the ring tonight. William is on the settle. The mother is on the settle beside him. Thomas is on a low stool at the mother's feet. Sarah is on the fireside 3-legged stool, close enough to feel the heat on her face. The smallest child is on the mother's lap, wrapped in the mother's own dark green shawl for warmth. The dog is at William's feet on the tiles, closer than usual. Even old Mrs. Wells, the widow, whose sewing usually keeps her at a distance from the fire because she does not want the light too warm on her eyes, has drawn her chair right up into the ring tonight, and she is knitting a stocking with her feet on a piece of hessian. The rushlight is lit on the pine table, but nobody is using it. Its light is not needed. The fire is enough. The mother is knitting by firelight, close work, using her fingers as much as her eyes. She's on a stocking of William's, black wool of a heavy cottage yarn on double-pointed needles, and her fingers move so fast that if you did not know the country trick of it, you would think she was doing something else. She's not looking at her hands, She is looking at the fire. She has knitted the same shape of stocking 1,000 times in her life, and her fingers know it. The father is reading, not the almanac tonight, but a heavy old volume of the country history of the parish, given to him by the parish clergyman some years back, and he is reading aloud quietly the section on the parish's medieval market rights, in a slow, careful voice. And Sarah on the stool has her hands round her knees and is listening. Thomas is repairing the leather thong of his father's working belt. The smallest child, wrapped in the shawl on the mother's lap, is nearly asleep. Old Mrs. Wells is teaching Sarah, in short, quiet asides between the father's reading, a new hymn her mother had used to sing, which Sarah is memorizing by hearing. Outside the wind is high. You can hear it against the little window. You can hear it around the chimney corner. You can hear it moving in the thatch. There is a small persistent moan of it up in the roof timbers and a soft steady thud of it against the door bar. The whole cottage is one small ring of light and warmth and quiet talk, with the great cold pressing all around it. The pig has been settled deeper in his sty with a fresh layer of straw and given an extra ration of hot pot boilings for warmth. The hens are on their perch. The parish beyond the window is dark and windy. The road out of the parish, 5 miles to the market town, would be no country to be on tonight. The parish is folded in on itself in 12 small lit rings of firelight. The mother finishes a row and turns the stocking to start another. Thomas finishes the leather thong and gets up and takes it to the peg where his father's belt hangs and threads it through. He does it deftly. When he sits back down, the mother nods at him without a word. The father closes the parish history at the end of the chapter on the market rights, and lays it down and takes up his mug of small beer, and drinks slowly, and looks at the fire. The parish clock strikes 10, muffled by the wind. The mother puts her knitting away, lays it in her basket, and turns to William and says in a low voice, "Time." The children are already asleep on their laps, the smallest child in the mother's, Sarah leaning against her father's knee. William nods. He carries the smallest child up. The mother helps Sarah to her feet and up the stair. Thomas takes the last small drink of his small beer and follows. Old Mrs. Wells lays down her knitting and stands stiffly and goes up. The dog, without a word, gets up and follows Thomas up the stair to sleep at the foot of Thomas's bed, which is his habit in a cold winter night. Downstairs the fire is banked, but even the banking is done more carefully than usual on a night like this, with a heavier layer of ash to keep the coals until dawn. The rushlight on the pine table is tipped into the last hot coal and put out. The door bar is checked and dropped tighter. The whole downstairs is dark and warm within 4 feet of the settled ashes. The fire is holding. The kettle is at rest. The house is settled. And through every one of these seasons, spring, haytime, harvest, autumn, winter, the same chain has been at work above the fire. That is where we're going next. The chimney chain deserves a chapter of its own. In the cottage of the 1800s, it was a small ordinary thing that everybody looked past 100 times a day, and yet it was, quietly, one of the most important things in the whole room. It was what let the fire feed the family. It was what held the height of the pot above the flame at every moment of the day. It was the small mechanical spine of the cottage, evening across every season of the year. Look at it once more. It is a chain of forged iron, 8 or 10 links on the working section, each link about 3 inches long and half an inch thick, blackened by 2 centuries of smoke into a soft velvet black. At the bottom is a heavy hook that ends in a small barb so that a pot handle, once slipped over it, cannot easily lift free by itself. Above the working chain, the chain doubles up over a further iron ring set into the underside of a beam that runs across the middle of the chimney breast. That beam is oak. It has been in the chimney of this cottage since the cottage was built, which is to say for at least 200 years, and it will be there when the chain and the pot and the family are all long gone. The chain hangs from that beam. The beam has held that chain 1,000 times over the height of its life. The chain adjusts by a system of hooks. Each of the working links can catch onto the beam ring at a different height. The pot can hang, at its lowest, so close to the coals that the underside of the pot is touching the top ash of the fire, and at its highest so far above the flame that a fingertip laid on the pot's underside is only warm. In between are 7 or 8 useful heights, one for a hard boil, one for a fast simmer, one for a slow simmer, one for a warming through, one for a keep of the pot's warmth off the fire while the fire is fed, one for a slow overnight cooking of a stew, one for a very slow all-afternoon simmer. The mother's hand knows the heights, the way a good hand knows the frets of a fiddle. She lifts the chain a link when the pot is threatening to boil over. She lets it down a link when the pot is not getting on. She raises it 2 links when she needs to lay a fresh log on the fire without cooking the pot. She drops it 3 links when the fire is coming back to full heat and the pot needs to catch up. She has been raising and lowering the chain since she was 10 years old, first in her own mother's kitchen and now in her own. She does it in the middle of a conversation without pausing what she is saying. She does it without thinking, with the same easy rhythm you might reach out and turn a light switch tonight. Take the chain through the seasons. In spring the chain runs a light pot. The pot of the season is a pot of new peas and young onions and lettuce leaf, needing only 20 or 30 minutes on the chain at a middle height. The chain hangs quiet through the long, light evenings. Its shadow on the whitewash of the ingle wall is barely there because the ingle is barely lit against the daylight of the door standing open. In haytime the chain barely moves. The fire is kept low all day to spare the fuel. The family eats cold in the garden. The pot is off. The chain hangs like an unused rope, faintly dusty, waiting for the season to shift. At harvest the chain runs busy. The mother is baking her plum cake in the small wall oven, and the small oven is fed by the fire, and the fire wants tending, and the chain is often up out of the pot's way for a fresh log at the back to give the oven its heat. Then the pot goes back on for the day's soup at a slow simmer, and then up again for another log. The chain moves 20 times in a day at harvest. In autumn, the chain is at its most useful. The pig has been killed, the flitch is hanging over it in the smoke, the mother is boiling elderberries in a smaller pot on the trivet, the main pot has a slow root soup going on the chain, the kettle is on the hob. The chain is up and down all evening. Its shadow moves slowly across the whitewash of the ingle wall. As the pot rises and falls, a small dark movement in the corner of your eye. In winter the chain does its greatest work. It holds the pot high in the fierce heat of the built-up fire so the family soup does not scorch, and it lowers the pot gently when the fire dies to its long overnight burn, and it holds the pot at a warming height for the last of the evening's small drinks. On the coldest nights of the year, when the fire is high and the room outside the ring is bitter, the chain and the pot are almost the only pieces of the room that are working, and the chain works quietly and steadily, and does its work. Now stand back a step and hear the chain across all of it. Its small squeak as it lifts a link, its low creak as it swings when a stir of the pot shifts the balance, the barely there tap of a link against the iron of the beam ring when it settles at a new height, its shadow on the whitewash of the ingle wall thrown by the fire moving with the pot, always in the same corner of the eye, not showy, not important, not remarked, but always there. Every cottage in every parish in the England of the 1800s had a chimney chain like this in the middle of its kitchen, and if you gathered up all those small chain sounds across the whole country of England on any one ordinary evening, you would have the small metallic accompaniment to a whole civilization's cooking. And the ear of any country woman anywhere would have known it for what it was without thinking, and would have heard the click of a mother's chimney chain in the small distant sound of any wind blowing at an unseen roof, and would have been comforted. The chain has been made and hung and rehung many times. This one was forged by the mother's father, who was a smith, in a shop in a village 15 miles away, in 1823, and it was given to the mother and William at their marriage in 1836 as a small serious wedding gift, because a good chimney chain was a good gift. It will be given in its turn to Sarah at Sarah's marriage, if Sarah marries, and Sarah's daughter will hang it in the kitchen of some further cottage in the country, and it will still work. Modern mirror moment, said gently. The words of the cottage evening are still on the listener's tongue tonight, even if the listener has never sat by a rural cottage hearth in their life. Bank the fire is still what many households say when they mean to shut up for the night. Curfew is still the word the parish curates use even though the fires it once covered are long gone. Rushlight is the word for a slender candle we still sometimes buy at Christmas. Truckle is the word for the small bed under a bigger bed. Small beer is still the phrase we use for something not to be worried about. It means small importance, and it came into the language from a real thing, the small beer of these cottages. Even ingle, which we do not use much anymore, is still in the corner of an English pub, or in the poetry we half remember from school, the deepest word for a warm corner beside a fire. Every one of these words is a survival of the cottage evening. Every time we use one, we're using a word that was worn into the language across 100,000 cottage nights, just like the one we're inside tonight. The chain across all those nights was up and down, tending. It is a small, warm, mechanical, faithful thing, this chain, and it has kept this cottage's food warm for 200 years. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled, and now let us widen the frame once more, past the door of this cottage, out to the neighbours who kept the whole parish's night. That is where we're going next, to the baker at 4 in the morning. Come with me for a while out of this cottage, and up the lane to the far end of the hamlet, and along the small back way past the walnut tree, and let us go and see the baker at his oven. We are going to stay in the deep of the night for a few chapters now, because the cottage evening does not sit alone. It is kept, whether the family in it knows it or not, by a small chain of neighbours who are awake in the dark on its behalf. The first of them is the baker. It is 4 in the morning. Our cottage, and every cottage in the row, is dark. The fire is banked. The mother is asleep. The father is asleep. Even the dog is asleep. The parish is folded in on itself under the winter stars. The wind that was up earlier has fallen. There is a heavy frost on every roof. At the top of the hamlet, in a small stone building with a chimney set apart from its living quarters, there is a low, warm light. That is the parish baker's shed, and the parish baker is inside it, and he has been up since 3:30. Alfred Williams, who wrote of the villages along the upper Thames at the end of the century, kept for us the memory of a real baker at Bampton in Oxfordshire, whose day started at exactly this hour. Mr. Norris is a man of about 50, a widower these 10 years, small, spare, careful, and, as bakers of his kind always are, marked at the forearms with the small pale burn scars of a lifetime of putting his hands into a hot oven. He is at his oven now. His name we do not know from Williams's own book, which only remembers the baker himself and his 4 in the morning start, so we may as well call him Mr. Norris and treat him as the plain man he was. The oven is not the small wall oven of a cottage. This is the parish oven, a great brick-built beehive of an oven set into the back wall of the shed, with a heavy iron door, and inside it, cold at 3:30, a fire has been laid. He lights it. The kindling takes. He lays on to it. Over the next 20 minutes, first small sticks, and then the year's stored pieces of oak that he saves for the oven's heat. The fire builds inside the oven. He shuts the iron door. The oven is now going to heat for 2 hours. That is the way a brick oven is heated for baking. You cannot rush it. You fire the oven, and you go about your other work, and by 6 o'clock the whole thick brick shell is up to a great steady even heat, which is when the bread can go in. He goes about his other work. He mixes his doughs. He has 3 doughs on the go tonight. His own bakery's cottage loaves, which he sells out at 4pence to the parish through the day. A batch of the neighbour cottage's own loaves, which the women brought round yesterday afternoon as risen doughs on a flowered cloth in a wooden trough, marked with a small paper tag with their names on them, waiting to be baked. And a smaller batch of the Sunday joints, which the more careful housewives have paid a halfpenny for the baker to hold overnight and roast for them in the residual heat of the oven when the loaves come out. We stand in the doorway of the shed and watch him. He works quietly and steadily. He does not sing, he does not whistle. He nods at us once with a small tired kindness, but does not speak. Bakers at 4 in the morning are not talkative men. What he is exact. He has been doing this for 40 years. He rolls each loaf on the floured table 3 times over, shapes it with the thumbs, sets it aside on a wooden peel to prove, and moves to the next. His hands are floured white to the elbow. His hair is flecked with flour where he has run a hand through it. His apron, once white, is a pale grey. Around him is the small, honest kingdom of a country bakery. A sack of flour at one end of the room, stitched at the mouth with a heavy hemp. A brown crock of yeast on the shelf, kept alive from the last night's brew. A great wooden trough for mixing. A row of wooden loaf tins along the shelf. A shelf of the parish's own loaves, on their trays marked with the papers of their names. A shelf of the Sunday joints. 3 small saddle of mutton and 1 small round of beef, wrapped in cheesecloth, waiting for their turn in the residual heat. A stone bottle of small beer for the baker's own crib. Above the table 1 long soft oil lamp that lights the working surface with a warm even yellow. The whole shed smells at 4 in the morning of the first breath of the oven fire and the yeast rising in the doughs, and it is one of the deepest warm smells of the country night. This is the smell that gets a village up. The baker's neighbours in the dark cottages behind the shed are not consciously aware of it, but the smell is out through the shed's low back window and into the yard behind. And any villager who is up at this hour to relieve themselves at their own outhouse door knows without knowing that the baker is at his ovens, and it is one of the small warm certainties of country life at this hour. By 6 o'clock the oven is up. Mr. Norris opens the iron door with a hooked poker. A great blast of even oven heat comes out into the shed. He rakes the burned coals out with a long iron rake and drops them into a metal bucket to be reused as the parish fuel. He wipes the oven floor clear with a wet mop on a long pole so the ash is gone. Then, in one after another swift practised motion, he loads his loaves. His own on the long peel first, sliding them onto the oven floor at their exact places. Then the neighbour cottage doughs on the long peel, each named loaf slid into its place. Then, at the back, the small Sunday joints. He shuts the iron door. The oven starts its work. The whole village's bread is now cooking in the great single warm cell of the parish oven, and the baker turns his back on it, for the first time in 3 hours, and he takes down his stone bottle of small beer and pours himself a mug and sits on a stool at the door of the shed for the first time all night and drinks it. An hour and a quarter, on average, a country loaf takes in a brick oven. By 7:15 the loaves are out on the peel, resting on the cooling racks. The neighbour cottages will come to collect theirs between 8 and 9, each woman bringing her farthing or halfpenny for the baking, taking her loaf with a nod and a word of thanks, going home to a family already up and hungry. The Sunday joints come out around 9, warm and roasted through, to be carried home under a clean cloth for the family's Sunday dinner. Every cottage table's Sunday joint reached the table because a baker was in his yard at 4. Every cottage's weekly loaf reached the shelf under the cloth in the same way. It is a small, unnamed, everyday miracle of the parish that a man is up in the dark alone with an oven, at 4 in the morning, so that the parish will not lack bread. He does not need to be reminded of this. Nobody thanks him particularly. He has paid his farthings, and he sleeps in the afternoon, and he does it again the next night. Come away now. The village is still dark. The frost is still on every roof. The baker's shed is a small warm point of light in a wide dark parish, and the baker is at his stool with his mug, and the whole day for 100 people is beginning without those people knowing, and further out on the downland another small light in the dark. That is where we are going next. Move out of the village now. Follow the small track that runs from the head of the hamlet out into the higher land where the parish's sheep flock is pastured. In this parish the downland begins 2 miles from the cottages. It is a series of long low chalk downs, cropped short by centuries of sheep, banded here and there with the small dark plantations of beech the 18th century, landowners planted for shelter. On a February night, at 3 in the morning, the downs are silver under a low bright moon, and the wind that has fallen in the village is still up here, rattling in the tops of the beech. Halfway along the ridge, in a fold of ground out of the direct wind, stands a small wheeled hut. It is about 10 feet long and 6 wide, its wooden walls tarred black, its roof a low-pitched felted thing, its little door and a small iron stovepipe out of the roof. This is the shepherd's lambing hut, and inside it is a man of about 50 who is spending the 6 weeks of the lambing season out here on the down with his flock. His name we may as well borrow, since country shepherds of the 1800s are often nameless in the archive, because they were the least literate members of a mostly literate class, and we may call our man Mr. Peden, and let him stand for the many. Mr. Peden has been a shepherd on this down for 36 years. He knows every ewe on this hill by sight. He knows which ones have lambed easily and which ones have lambed hard, and he knows which of the ewes carrying twins are strong and which will need him at the hardest part of the night. He is a plain, quiet, weathered man, in a canvas coat and a great felted hat, with a shepherd's crook of his own carving, and a small oil lantern with a horn window. Inside the hut tonight there is a small iron stove alight, a kettle on the stove, a lantern hung from a hook on the ceiling, a low wooden bunk with a straw mattress, and a small folding table on which are laid out the tools of a shepherd's spring. A bottle of iodine for the umbilical stumps of the newborn lambs, a length of soft cord for a difficult delivery, a small tin of the shepherd's own honey and butter mixture that is his standing remedy for a weak lamb, a bottle of raw milk to warm on the stove for a lamb whose mother's milk has not yet come down, and a heavy folded coat of his own for wrapping a lamb against his own body's warmth in the very worst cold. Every 2 hours through the night, Mr. Peden gets up from his bunk, pulls on his coat and his hat, takes the lantern from the hook, and walks out into the lambing pens that ring the hut. He walks the whole ring once, quietly, lifting the lantern to each ewe to check her. He's looking for the telltale signs of a labour coming on. The ewe apart from the others, restless, pawing the ground, the first flutter under her tail. He knows the signs the way another man knows his own boot sole. Tonight, on his 3 o'clock round, he finds a ewe he had been watching for 2 days, a first-time mother, an anxious black-faced ewe in labour in the corner of the far pen. He kneels beside her in the frost of the down. He speaks to her in a low, soft voice. "Steady, my girl," he says, "steady." His hands go to work. He is unhurried. Country shepherds at their work of lambing are the least hurried men in the world, because a lamb rushed is a lamb lost. He waits for the ewe. He watches. When the first small hoof appears in the wrong position, he turns it carefully with the flat of his fingers and waits again. The ewe strains. There is a pause. Then the lamb comes. The lamb comes wet and warm and steaming into the cold night. Mr. Peden wipes the mucus from its nose with a piece of cloth, sets it down on the frost, watches it for its first breath. It breathes. He nudges the ewe. The ewe stands and turns and finds her lamb. She begins to lick it in the long, slow, important licks of the ewe learning her lamb. Mr. Peden dips the umbilical stump in the iodine, marks the lamb's back with a small dot of red rattle so he can identify it later, and stands back. He watches for 5 whole minutes as the ewe and the lamb make their small, quiet acquaintance. When the lamb, on wobbling legs, finds the ewe's teat and starts to feed, he lets out a small breath of his own, and he pulls his hat firmer against the wind, and he takes his lantern and moves on to check the next ewe. That is one lamb. That is one small warm success in a night that has, honestly, 1 or 2 failures too. There is a runt in the second pen who was born weak yesterday, and who Mr. Peden has been feeding by hand for 2 days on warmed milk from a small glass bottle, and who tonight, on his 3 o'clock round, is still alive but thinner. He wraps the runt in the folded coat and brings him into the hut and puts him on the wooden floor beside the stove, and warms up an inch of milk in the small saucepan, and feeds the runt the milk from the glass bottle a drop at a time. The runt drinks. He lays him back on the folded coat close to the stove and returns to the door of the hut and looks out. Above the down the sky is enormous and cold. The stars are very sharp. The moon has moved a little to the west. The wind is a low, steady whisper in the beeches. Far away, 6 miles across the low ground, the small chimneys of the village are invisible in the dark, but Mr. Peden knows they are there, and he knows the mothers in those cottages are asleep, and he knows some of the ewes on this hill will be their household's mutton next spring, and he knows he stands between the whole rural pattern of this year's mutton and this year's wool and this year's woolen socks and the cold of the down and the fox on the hedge. He does not think of it in those words. He thinks instead that the runt is warmer now, and that the first-time mother in the far pen is doing well with her new lamb, and that his own hands, though numb, are still working, and that in an hour he will boil the kettle on the stove and have a mug of hot tea. Every 2 hours, all night, all lambing season, which is 6 weeks. Every year for 36 years, that is a shepherd. He is one of the great uncounted keepers of the country night in the 1800s, and he is up alone under the moon so that his parish will have its wool and its mutton and its socks and its blankets, so that a mother in a cottage down in the village can wrap her sleeping child in a shawl of good country wool tonight, and know the shawl is holding. Come back down off the down now. Come back into the village. The village is still dark. The baker is still at his stool with his mug. Something else is moving in the parish's dark. That is where we are going next, to the parish watchman with his lantern. Come along the main street of the village. It is a small country main street, not paved but well-trodden earth, with the cottages and the little shops set along it, and, at the middle of the street, a stone drinking trough for the horses, and, at the far end, the church with its low square tower and its yew tree. At 2:30 in the morning the whole street is dark. The lamps of the more prosperous towns have not reached this parish. There is no gaslight here. There is only the small low-lit windows of the cottages of the sick, and in one first-floor window the lamp of a woman up with her sick child. Down the middle of the street, at a slow, steady walking pace, comes the parish watchman. He is an old man of about 65, retired from the parish farm, taken on now by the vestry to walk the parish streets at night from 10 until 5. He is a small, wiry man in a heavy dark greatcoat, a black felt hat with a leather brim, a woolen scarf across his mouth against the frost, a great old lantern of iron and horn hanging in his gloved hand, and a stout wooden staff in his other hand, which he uses partly as a walking stick and partly as a badge of his small night office. His name we may as well borrow from the parish record and call him Mr. Fletcher. He walks the length of the main street at the same slow pace. At the drinking trough he stops, holds up his lantern to check that the water in the trough has not frozen so hard. The horses cannot break it in the morning, a wafer of ice tonight breakable, and moves on. At the corner of the church he stops again, glances up at the tower to see whether the parish clock is running. The moon behind it is enough light to see the hands, and calls out in a low, steady country voice that is the voice of the parish watchman across the whole country of England. 8 of the clock and a fair night. No, that is not right at this hour, it is nearer 3. So he calls 3 of the clock and a fair night. That is the small ceremony that gave the parish watchman his name. Once every hour, when he passed the church clock and knew the time exactly, he would call out the hour and the weather. 12 of the clock and a fair night. 2 of the clock and a cold wind. 4 of the clock and a heavy frost. Any villager awake in a cottage on the main street would hear the call as a small warm reassurance of the parish night, would know from it what the time was without needing a clock, would know from the tone of the call that the watchman was well, and that the parish was quiet, and any villager not awake would sleep on through it as they slept on through the church clock itself. It was the small verbal music of the parish nights of the country in the 1700s, and much of the 1800s, a survival of the medieval watch that had once been kept in every walled town in England, and it had softened in the country parishes, by the 1850s in most places, into a memory kept alive only by the old watchmen who had themselves grown up with it. In the towns of any size by then, the new parish police were beginning to take over. But in the smaller villages Mr. Fletcher walked, and Mr. Fletcher called the hour right through the middle decades of the century. He walks on down the street. He stops in a moment at the door of the small shop of the parish shoemaker and shakes the latch to see it is locked. It is. He walks around to the back of the parish farm's yard and shakes the gate. Locked. He calls up to the window of the widow Ann Berry's cottage at the end of the street in a low voice to see that she is well tonight. Because he knows she has been unwell for a week, she calls back that she's warm and comfortable and asleep, thank you. He comes back to the main street. He turns and starts his walk back to the other end. In an hour he will pass the church again. In an hour he will call out 4 of the clock and a fair night. Between now and then he will walk the length of the parish twice, checking every door he passes, holding his lantern up to every alley he goes by, calling once quietly at the door of the cottage of a widower, whose fire he knows to be low tonight, to ask if the widower is warm. A nod through the window is the answer. He will be alone in the street for most of these hours. He will be, in his own quiet way, the parish's sleeping neighbour. The parish watchman is not a policeman. He is not a warden. He is not there to prevent theft, particularly because there is essentially no theft in a parish this small. He is there to be the parish's small awake conscience during the hours when the rest of the parish is not. He is there so that if a fire started, or a woman went into labour a month early, or a child fell out of bed and hurt itself, there would be one man in the parish who was upright and walking and ready to be called. He is there because a village is a body, and even a body asleep needs a heart that is beating. The lantern he carries is a small ordinary iron lantern with a horn window. Inside it, a small tallow candle burns in a metal holder. The whole light of it is perhaps as much as one good tallow candle can throw, which is enough to see the ground 3 feet in front of his feet, and to throw a small warm circle of yellow on the walls of the cottages he passes. He tops up the candle at midnight, and again at 3, from a small pouch of spares in his coat pocket. He has kept lanterns lit like this for the 12 years he has been the parish's watchman, and he was a night warden of a hay meadow for the 10 years before that, and he was a night stableman at the parish farm before that, and he is, in a very quiet way, a man of the country night. He does not mind it. He has, if the truth were told, a small quiet love for it. He likes the way the parish sleeps under his lantern. He passes the last cottage. He turns. He starts his walk back. Around him the parish is silent under the frost. His boots crunch on the small ridges of frozen mud in the street. His lantern throws its small warm circle. His breath in the cold makes a small white cloud, and in the church, ahead of him at the far end of the street, the clock strikes 3, muffled a little by the wind. Come away from the street now. There is one more small light in the parish's dark that we should stand next to. It is at the very edge of the parish, in a small stone house on the road out. That is where we're going next, to the turnpike keeper by her small fire. The road out of the parish, on the way toward the market town 7 miles away, runs across low ground and through a small oak wood, and comes, at about a mile from the last cottage of the hamlet, to a place where the road narrows between 2 banks. At the narrowing stands a wooden gate across the road, painted white, with a spike of iron at the top and a great iron ring for a lantern. Beside the gate stands a small stone house, 1 story, 1 room deep, whitewashed, with a shingled roof and a small chimney. This is the turnpike house of the parish, and this is where the coaches and the carts on the way to the market town stop, and this is where a small toll is paid for the passage. Turnpikes were the great road network of the country in the 1700s and the first 2/3 of the 1800s. Their tolls paid for the maintenance of the road, and the small toll houses along their length were the small hubs of the country's traffic. They were manned in the daylight by a man or a woman who lived in the toll house, took the toll from every passing coach and cart, kept a written record in a book of the passage, and opened and closed the gate 100 times a day. And in the night they were manned too. There were far fewer coaches on the road in the night, but there were some. The night mail coach to the market town went past at midnight, and again at 4 in the morning. The doctor's gig went past when the doctor was called out. A late farmer coming home from the market town after a slow supper at a coaching inn might go past at 11. The keeper was up for all of them. In this parish, the turnpike keeper is a woman. She is a widow of about 60 called Mrs. Simmons. Her husband was the keeper before her, and when he died in 1856, the trust of the road gave her the keeping and the house and the small stipend that went with it, because she was known in the parish as a careful and honest woman, and because the trust did not want to disturb what worked. She has been the keeper now for 11 years. She lives in the small stone house with her old black cat and her scarce belongings, and she has been on the road every night of those 11 years. Come inside her toll house. There is one room, a bed built against the far wall, with a plain white counterpane, a small stove in the middle of the room with a chimney up to the roof, in which a small, honest fire is burning, a wooden chair set at the fire, a small round table with a candle, on which lies the toll book, a bound ledger with a pencil beside it, a shelf with a Bible and a hymn book, and a small stack of the parish gazette, a hook on the wall on which hangs her woolen shawl, a stone jug of water on the table, a small brown teapot beside the stove, a stone cup for her tea. That is the whole of it. She's sitting in the wooden chair beside the fire when we come in. She has a book open in her lap, an old copy of an early novel she's read 4 times before, and she's reading it not for the story but for the company of the sentences. She's knitting at the same time a small ordinary stocking in a plain dark wool. Her old cat is on her lap. The small fire in the stove is at a low glow. The wind is quiet tonight beyond the small window. It is not yet 3 in the morning. At about 2:45 she hears it, before we do. The faint sound of a horse and cart on the road, coming up out of the wood. She sets her book down on the table, lifts the cat gently off her lap and sets him on the chair, takes her shawl from the hook, wraps herself in it, takes the small lantern from the shelf, lights the lantern from the stove candle, and steps out of the door of the toll house into the frost. At the gate she stands quietly waiting. The horse and cart come up. It is a farmer she knows from a parish 2 beyond, a man called Mr. Bexley, coming home from a late Wednesday market and probably a longer than intended supper. He nods to her tiredly from the seat of the cart. She lifts the lantern to his face and to the number painted on the side of the cart, checks it against the little metal tag on his cart handle, notes the number in her head, and asks him for the toll. The toll for a farmer's cart of this size is a groat, which is 4pence in old money. He fishes in the leather pouch at his belt, brings out 4 pennies, hands them down to her. She takes the 4 pennies, drops them into the small tin pouch at her waist, opens the gate. He drives through. She closes the gate behind him. She calls after him quietly, "A safe road home, Mr. Bexley." He raises a hand without turning, and the cart is gone up the road into the dark. She comes back inside. She goes to the little table, opens the toll book, dips the pencil in a small piece of ink she has on the table, and writes the entry. Mr. Bexley, cart, 1 horse, 3/4 to 3, 4pence. She closes the book. She takes off her shawl, hangs it, sits down in her chair, picks up the cat from where he was warming her seat, puts him back on her lap, picks up her book, picks up her knitting, and resumes. That was 1 coach. Between now and dawn there will be 2 more. The 4 in the morning mail from the county town, which is a fast small mail coach with 2 horses and a driver and a guard and a small oil lamp on the front, will pass at 4 sharp with a small silver bell, and she will be at the gate for that too, and she will note the passage in her book. Then, at about 5:15, a farmer taking his early load of turnips to the market town will pass, and she will take his 6pence and note his cart and open his gate and let him through. Then at 6 the first grey of the day will start to show against the sky above the wood, and she will draw the shutters back from her small window, and she will make herself a mug of hot tea, and she will start her long, slow morning at the gate that will only end when she goes to her bed at midday to sleep the sleep of the country night keepers, which is a good honest sleep of 4 or 5 hours in the middle of the day, and then she will be up again at 6 in the evening for the day's second half, and the parish's traffic will pass her all evening again, and she will not go back to bed properly until midnight, and then the night hours will start again. She is the small, quiet inhabitant of the parish's own edge. She keeps the road for the parish. She takes the toll for the trust that keeps the road passable. She lifts her lantern to every passing face. She writes every passage in her book. She sits alone in her small stone house with her old cat, and her small fire, and her plain shawl, and her Bible, and her hymn book, and her stocking. She's not lonely. She's not honestly ever lonely. She's on the road, and the road is a company of a kind for someone who has always been in the country, and has always been in the small quiet trades of the country's edge. She's one of the keepers of the parish's night. And now, back inside the cottage of our own family in the middle of the parish, one more figure the listener may recognise most of all. That is where we are going next. Come back down the road, and back through the parish, and back down the lane, and back through the low door of our own cottage, and up the wooden stair, and into the chamber above the kitchen. It is 3 in the morning. The whole family is asleep in this chamber, and yet in the corner of the chamber, in the low light of the fire coming up through the gaps in the floorboards, one figure is upright and awake, and holding a very small warm bundle to her shoulder. It is Hannah, the mother of the cottage. She's been awake for about a quarter of an hour. The bundle at her shoulder is her youngest, the child of 2.5, who was set to bed at 8, but who was woken with the small end of a cough in her chest and who needed her mother. Hannah heard the small first stirring of the child before the child had properly woken, in that particular alertness a mother keeps even in sleep, and she was up before she had quite decided to be up, and now she sat in the small hard chair by the head of the truckle bed, with the child against her shoulder, quiet, rocking almost imperceptibly. Below her the fire in the kitchen is banked low but throws just enough light up through the floorboards to make a soft glow around her feet, and on the small wooden chest beside her a fresh rushlight is burning down to its holder. The child is not distressed. The mother is skilled. She knew the moment the child stirred what would be needed, and by the time the child was fully awake the mother had a small stone bottle of warm honey and water in her hand. She has given the child 3 small sips. The child has drunk each sip carefully, has curled back against her mother's shoulder, and is now 3/4 of the way back to sleep. The mother sits still. It is very quiet in the chamber. The father is asleep at his end of the room with his back to her. Old Mrs. Wells, the widow, at her end breathes gently and evenly. In the truckle bed at Hannah's feet, the eldest daughter Sarah is asleep top to tail with her sister, and Sarah has not stirred. Thomas, the eldest son, is asleep in the second bedroom, the small chamber at the top of the stair. Nobody is awake in the whole cottage except the mother and the child. She rocks the child. She does not think of much. Her mind is at that particular quiet at which mothers of infants everywhere are in the middle of the night, when there is nothing to do except to hold and to wait. In this 3/4 of an hour she's going to look at nothing in particular in the darkened chamber, and she is going to hear the small breathing of every other member of her family in every corner of the room, and she's going to feel the small warm weight of her sleepy child against her shoulder, and she's going to think in a very still and unwavering way that this is all she wants. There is a small piece of hard history she carries here, and she carries it quietly, the way country mothers do. Between Sarah and this youngest one there was another child, a girl who was born and lived 14 months in this cottage, and died of a fever in a cold March. She was buried in the country churchyard in a small oak coffin the father made himself. That was 3 years ago. Hannah does not think of it every night. She does not think of it honestly most nights. But sitting in this chair at 3 in the morning with a warm, sleepy child at her shoulder, she thinks of it now, briefly, and she thinks of it the way country mothers thought of it, which was to be quietly grateful for the 4 living children asleep around her, under the wool, and to hold the small warm one at her shoulder a little more firmly, and to say a small ordinary country prayer of thanks to her God, and then to let the grief lie back down where it lies. She does not wake anybody by holding it. She does not extend it. The grief is a small, quiet room inside her chest that she visits sometimes, briefly, and then closes the door of the room and comes back to the room of the living. That is how country grief lived. It did not go away, but it did not either own the mother, and the mother did not let it own her, because the 4 living children needed her, and needed her whole. That is one of the honest, quiet strengths of a cottage mother of the 1800s. She could hold hard things without letting them break her. The room is very warm. The chamber up here has warmed through the day from the fire below, and Hannah has piled the wool blankets onto Sarah and the youngest, and has laid the father's greatcoat on top of them for the very last edge of insulation, and the truckle bed is a small warm hollow of sleeping children, and even the coldest wall of the chamber, the north-facing gable, is only cool to the palm tonight rather than frosted. There is a small window in the far wall onto which a low moon is coming. The fire below throws its soft red glow up through the floor. The rushlight on the chest burns its own small orange. The mother's rocking slows. The child is fully asleep now against her shoulder, breathing in the small, deep, even breaths of a child who has been quieted. Hannah, very carefully, leans forward, then gently lowers the child back onto the pillow of the truckle bed beside Sarah, so gently that the child does not so much as change her breathing. She tucks the blanket over her. She lays a hand a moment on the child's cheek. She waits 10 seconds. The child sleeps on. She stands slowly so the chair does not creak. She takes the rushlight from the chest. She goes to the small window and stands a moment, looking out at the parish under the frost and the moon. Somewhere out there Mr. Norris the baker is at his oven. Mr. Peden the shepherd is on his round. Mr. Fletcher the watchman is halfway down the main street. Mrs. Simmons at the turnpike is warming her hands at her small stove. Somewhere in another cottage, in another parish, another mother is up at 3 with another child, in exactly this same attitude, one small point of made light in a small dark chamber. An old attitude, older than history, held tonight by 100,000 women across the country of England in the same way she is holding it. Modern mirror moment, said very softly. If you happen to be listening to this tonight with a hand on a sleeping child, in a chair by a small light, in a room where everyone else is asleep, know that you are in an unbroken line. Every English century has had you in it. It has always been kept in every parish, on every hill, in every cottage, by hands like yours. It is being kept somewhere else tonight while you're keeping it here. It will be kept somewhere tomorrow night while you are asleep yourself. She turns from the window. She goes to the head of the stair and goes down. She checks the fire below, which is banked well and glowing softly and needs nothing. She goes to the pine table, takes up the pot of the fresh dipped rushlights, sets a new one ready for tomorrow morning. She tips her own rushlight into the last hot coal so it will not burn on unattended. She takes up a cup of the small beer from the barrel and drinks half of it, standing at the door of the kitchen in her nightdress with her shawl round her shoulders. She looks around the kitchen a moment, the chain on its hook, the pot on its shelf, the rag rug by the settle, the clock ticking. The whole cottage is settled, and it is being kept. She goes back up the stair. She lies down beside William, who has slept through everything. He shifts slightly in his sleep and puts his arm across her without waking. Within a few minutes she is asleep. The 4 living children breathe evenly in their beds. The banked fire below breathes once and settles. The fire is holding. The kettle is at rest. The house is settled. And now, back inside our cottage, the household is coming to its own rest. That is where we're going next, into the settling of the family for the deep of the night. Come back to the evening we started with, the ordinary Wednesday evening in the cottage of the 1800s. The clock in the corner has struck 8. The parents' short, quiet reading has finished. The father has closed the Bible. The mother has laid down her darning. The rushlight on the pine table is halfway down its length. Sarah's hymn has been sung, and now the mother turns to Sarah on the fireside stool and to the smallest child asleep against her, and it is time for the children to go up. On a Saturday night once a week, the whole ritual of the children's bedtime is longer. There is a tin bath brought up from the shed and set on the tiles in front of the fire, and the kettle is boiled twice for the warm water, and the smallest first and then Sarah are bathed in the warm water in front of the fire, and dried in a great rough cottage towel that has been warmed by the settle, and dressed in fresh night-dresses. On a Wednesday night, tonight, the bath is not brought up. The children are washed, hands and face and neck, at the leather bucket by the door, in cold water. That is enough. That is the country cottage's Wednesday. The mother lifts the smallest child from the settle. The child is deeply asleep against her shoulder. She carries the child to the pine table, sets her carefully in the small wooden chair for a moment, undresses her without waking her. A cottage mother's hands are so practised at this that she can take the small dress off the small child without the child so much as changing her breathing, slips the small linen nightdress over her head, and picks her up again. She turns to Sarah. Sarah is 9. Sarah undresses herself in the fireside ring quickly and neatly. Sarah's cottage nightdress is a plain white linen down to the ankles, given to her by her mother's sister 3 Christmases ago, cut down each year as Sarah has grown. Sarah slips it over her head and drops her day dress in a small folded pile on the stool. She turns to her mother and takes her hand. Her mother, with the smallest child asleep on the other arm, holds Sarah's small hand with her free one. Flora Thompson remembered the children of her Oxfordshire hamlets' cottages being bathed on Saturday nights, and after Gentle Jesus was said, tucked up in bed with a peppermint or clove ball to suck. That is the exact bedtime prayer of the country cottage of the 1800s. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon a little child, pity my simplicity, suffer me to come to thee. The mother says it now, standing in the middle of the kitchen with a child on each arm, quietly, and Sarah says it after her line by line, and even the smallest child, who might have been thought too small for it, mouths the words in her sleep because she has heard it 300 nights. Then the mother crosses to the foot of the stair. She takes down from the shelf beside the stair a small tin box the size of a snuff box, in which live the family's peppermint balls. She opens the box, takes out 2 small pink lumps of hard-boiled peppermint sugar, about the size of a marble, gives one to Sarah, tucks one into the palm of the smallest child. Sarah pops hers into her mouth. The smallest child in her sleep closes her fingers on her one. The peppermint is a bedtime treat that costs the mother a farthing every second market day, and it is a bedtime tradition that reaches back in her own family to her mother and her grandmother, and it is one of the small, warm, reliable ceremonies of the cottage evening. The clove ball in A Mother Who Had Cloves was the same idea. The taste on the tongue was the last taste of the day. She takes down the small rushlight the mother uses only at the stair and up in the chamber, and lights it from the main rushlight on the pine table. She turns and starts up the stair. The stair is wooden. It is a straight, tight, steep flight of 9 steps, boxed in against the wall of the kitchen, and it creaks in 3 places. The mother knows the 3 creaks, and she steps around them by habit, so as not to wake the smallest child. Sarah, behind her, does not know them, and does not care, and steps on all 3 and creaks all the way up. It does not matter. The chamber above is theirs. The chamber above the kitchen is a low room under the eaves. The ceiling slopes toward the wall on the outside, and the outside wall is low enough that a full-grown adult must stoop to stand at the outside window. The chamber runs the width of the cottage. At the far end, the parents' bed, a plain wooden bedstead with rope lattice for a mattress support, a straw-ticked mattress on the ropes, a plain white linen bolster, 3 grey wool blankets, and on top of them the father's greatcoat for the coldest nights. At the near end, Sarah's bed, an identical smaller one. Under Sarah's bed on 4 small wooden wheels lives the truckle bed for the smallest child, which is pulled out at bedtime. Between the parents' bed and Sarah's bed, a plain oak chest on which stand a china wash basin, a jug, and a small brown bar of soap. Above the chest, a plain wooden shelf on which sits a small frame woodcut of the Queen and 2 small tin candlesticks. The mother sets the small rushlight on the chest. She lays the smallest child still asleep into the truckle bed. Sarah, without being asked, has climbed into her own bed and is already under her blanket. The mother tucks the blanket up over the smallest child, then straightens the covers on Sarah's bed, sits on the edge of it, and puts her hand a moment on Sarah's hair. Sarah looks up at her and gives her a small tired smile and closes her eyes. The mother sits a further moment. Then she stands. She checks the truckle bed once more, and the smallest child is fully asleep with a small pink peppermint fist against her cheek. She stands over her a further moment. Then she goes to the chest and blows out the rushlight, and the room is dark except for the very faint red glow of the fire coming up through the boards. She goes down the stair. She steps around the 3 creaks. She comes back into the kitchen, and the kitchen is unchanged, and the father is where he was on the settle, and Thomas at the far end is where he was, and the fire is the same low, steady glow it was, and the room is only slightly emptier for the 2 small warm figures now upstairs asleep. She sits down beside her husband. She does not speak. He does not speak. She takes up her mug of tea that has gone cold and drinks it anyway. He looks into the fire. They have an hour, or an hour and a half, before they too go up. That is the 1 hour of the day that most cottage adults kept for themselves. That is the hour we're inside now, and it is a good hour, and it is the next thing to sit with. This is the mother's and the father's hour. It is not a long hour. It runs, in most cottages of the 1800s, from about 8:30 to about 10, so it is properly an hour and a half. It is the only stretch of the day in which the 2 of them are quietly awake in the same room together with nobody to feed and nobody to fetch anything for, and no small hand pulling on the apron, and no urgent piece of unattended work. They spend it doing very little. That is the whole point of it. They have both been at their work all day, and the sitting still is the shape of the rest. He is on the settle, at his end, 1 foot on the fender, mug of small beer at his elbow. She is on the settle beside him, at her end, a small piece of the mother's mending she has picked up almost by accident, a hem of Sarah's Sunday pinafore that came loose today at church, sewing it slowly by firelight without particularly caring whether it gets finished tonight or tomorrow. The dog's at the father's feet on the tiles, in the deepest sleep. The pot on the shelf above the fire is by now completely cool. The kettle on the hob is at a very low mutter. The rushlight on the pine table has burned down to nearly its holder, and the mother will get up in a moment and set it out. The clock in the corner ticks its slow tock. Outside, the parish is beginning to fold in on itself for the night. The wind has fallen, or, if the wind is up, the door-bar holds and the small casement holds, and the sound of it is only a low background thing. Thomas, at 14, has come across from the far end and taken his mother's place on the fireside stool for a moment, warming his hands. He does not speak either. He sits 3 or 4 minutes in his own particular boy's silence, then stands up, gives his mother a small tired nod, gives his father a small tired nod, and goes up the stair to the second small chamber at the head of the stair where he sleeps alone. In 2 minutes, from the sound of the boards, he is in bed. In 3 minutes, he is asleep. Country boys of 14 who have been at farm work since dawn sleep the deepest sleep of any age. The mother and father are alone in the kitchen now. Old Mrs. Wells, the widow, went up earlier, at 8, with her sewing under her arm and a small candle in her hand, saying good night in her small quiet voice. The children are all upstairs. The dog's asleep. There is no more to be done for anyone tonight. For 15 minutes they do not speak at all. Country husbands and wives at the end of a long day did not speak much, and did not need to. They were company for each other in the way old married pairs are company for each other, which is to say by presence rather than by talk. The mother sews her small few stitches. The father drinks his small beer. At about 8:45 there is a small tap at the door. The mother rises and lifts the door bar and opens the door. It is Mary Pierce from the middle cottage, come across with a small bowl in her hands. She has brought a little of the neighbour cottage cow's cream that she was given tonight, and could not use all of. She hands it in. The mother thanks her, and Mary Pierce shakes her head and smiles and turns to go back to her own cottage. It is a moment of about 30 seconds. The mother closes the door, drops the bar, brings the cream to the shelf, sets it under a plate. She sits back down. She takes up her small piece of mending again. This is the small daily neighbouring of the country cottage of the 1800s, small and casual and constant, and it is one of the reasons the parish held together the way it did. The father, without looking up, says quietly that the leek soup was good tonight. The mother says thank you. That is the extent of the appreciation of the meal that the father will give her tonight. But it is enough, because they both know it is enough, and the small compliment lands in a rest of 2 seconds and is remembered. After a further pause, the mother says in the same tone that she must remember to send Sarah with the twopence for the coal fund on Sunday. The father nods. That is the entire piece of household administration for the evening. There will be nothing more said. It is enough. They sit for another quarter of an hour. The mother finishes her small piece of mending, folds it, and sets it on the small side stand beside the settle. The father drinks off the last of his mug of small beer, sets the mug down. The dog opens one eye briefly, closes it, sleeps. The mother looks at the father. The father looks at the mother. They do not smile particularly. They do not say anything. They exchange one very small quiet nod that has meant between the two of them for 16 years that the day is done. She stands and gathers up her small basket and takes it to the pine dresser and puts it away. He stands and stretches once and takes his mug to the shelf. They come back to the fire together and stand a moment beside it. The fire is at its low, overnight glow already. The mother is going to bank it further in a moment, but first the door bar is checked. The shutter of the small kitchen window is latched. The tap of the small beer barrel is checked. The tin box of peppermint balls is put back on the shelf. All the small closing rituals of the cottage evening, every one of them the same tonight as it will be tomorrow, and as it was yesterday, and as it has been in this cottage for 100 years, and as it will be for another 20 until the paraffin lamps come and the gas comes and the walls change and the way of it shifts. But not tonight. Tonight it is the mother's hands doing the small closings, the way her own mother taught her and her mother before her. The fire is holding, the kettle is at rest, the house is settled, and when they are ready, the fire itself is prepared for the night. That is where we are going next. The banking of the fire is the small, deepest ritual of the country cottage evening. It is the ritual the whole day has been leading to. It is what makes the morning possible. It is why the day tomorrow can begin without a walk to a neighbour's cottage for a fresh light. And it is why the whole household will wake in a warm room to a fire that only needs coaxing rather than one that needs starting from cold. Hannah kneels a moment at the hearth. The fire is at its low, late evening state. The 2 great logs from earlier have burned down. Their outsides are grey ash. Their hearts are red coals. The trivet has been moved aside. The chain is empty on its hook. The kettle has been taken off the hob and set on the pine table. The whole hearth is bare of workday things now, and the fire is what she's about to make ready. She takes the small poker and turns the biggest coal at the back to expose a fresh face of heat. She takes the fire tongs and one at a time gathers the smaller live coals from the edges and heaps them into a compact glowing pile at the back of the hearth, against the base of the ingle wall. She takes the shovel and from the ash pit at the front of the hearth, which is a small brick chamber under the grate for the falling ash, she lifts a shovelful of the fine grey wood ash. She holds the shovel at a small angle above the heaped coals and lets the ash sift down in a light steady rain so that it settles over the coals evenly, covering them in a thin layer that is fine enough to smother the flame, but coarse enough to let a small living warmth breathe up through it. She sifts a second shovelful. She sifts a third. By the third, she's looking at a small warm grey mound in the middle of the hearth, out of which no flame is visible, but from which a small, even faint red glow is still coming, and inside which the biggest coals are still alive. She lays a further shovel of ash more heavily around the outside of the mound, so the mound is sealed at its edges. She stands back. The mound is set. The banked fire is done. There is no flame. There is only deep inside a heart of live coal that will keep for 8 or 9 hours, and that at 5:30 tomorrow morning she will rake apart with the poker to find a living red centre from which a fresh fire can be brought back with a piece of kindling and a soft breath. That is banking. It is a small, quiet skill. Every cottage mother in England knew it. It was taught to her by her own mother when she was small. It was one of the first serious tasks she was trusted with as a girl. It was one of the last tasks the very old mothers gave up. It was the practice that made the medieval word curfew, from the old French couvre-feu, to cover the fire, an actual physical everyday act rather than a poetic phrase. Once, hundreds of years ago, the parish curfew bell tolled at 8 in the summer and 7 in the winter, to order every cottage in the parish to cover its fire, and the point of the bell was to protect the parish from house fires overnight, and every cottage from Kent to Cumberland listened for it, and did the deed on the bell. By the 1800s, the bell was a memory in most parishes, softened into a small piece of local pride that some churches still rang out of custom, and most did not. But the deed was still done. Hannah has done it tonight. Every mother in every cottage in England has done it tonight. Nothing tomorrow that the household needs to eat, drink, warm, or wash will be possible if the deed was not done. That is why the deed is done. She stands a moment looking at her banked fire. She checks the ash for evenness. She lays the shovel down beside the hearth. She takes the last small rushlight on the pine table, tips it into a hot coal at the edge of the banked mound so it burns itself out safely, and drops the black stub into the small tin dish, where it will be cleared out in the morning. She turns from the fire. The kitchen is now lit only by the small red glow from inside the banked mound. Enough to see the pine table by, enough to see the wall by, but only just. She crosses to the door. She checks the door bar. It is dropped. She lifts the bar a fraction and drops it again, hearing the small solid thud of the iron in the iron notch, satisfied. She goes to the small casement window. She lays her hand on the shutter. It is latched. She checks the small kitchen window at the back. It is latched. She crosses to the wooden dresser and to the shelf above it, and takes down the wooden spoon from its hook. She looks at it a second. Then, in a small ritual she does every night without knowing she's doing it, she hangs the wooden spoon back on its hook, one hook further along, so that in the morning it will be on a slightly different hook, and her hand will find it a fraction to the left. She could not tell you why she does this. She has done it in this cottage for 16 years. Her mother did it before her in the cottage of her own childhood. Perhaps it is because the small rearrangement is the smallest of the day's tidying, and a house that is already tidy still likes to be given one small change to notice in the morning. Perhaps it is simply a habit that grew and stayed. Whatever it is, the spoon moves. She stands a moment in the middle of the kitchen. Everything is in its place. The pot is on the shelf, covered. The bread is under its cloth. The small beer barrel is at the door with its tap closed. The mending basket is on the pine dresser. The Bible is on the shelf. The clock is ticking its slow, calm tock. The banked fire is at its low, warm red. The chain hangs quiet on its hook. The room is at its overnight state, and it is ready. She goes to the foot of the stair. She looks back once at the kitchen. She steps up. She takes the boards around the 3 creaks by habit. She reaches the chamber above. The fire is holding. The kettle is at rest. The house is settled. And then, up the stair, into the deep of the night. That is where we are going next. The chamber above the kitchen is dark. Only the small red glow from the fire below is coming faintly up through the gaps in the boards. Hannah undresses in the dark. Her clothes go across the wooden chest, folded roughly. Her nightdress is over her head. She lies down beside William. William, in his deep working man's sleep, shifts in his sleep and puts his arm across her without waking. Within a very few minutes she's asleep. Now everyone in the room is asleep. William at the far end, Hannah beside him, Sarah in her small bed. The smallest child in the truckle bed under Sarah. Old Mrs. Wells at her end of the room in her small hard bed with her patchwork over her. Thomas in the small second chamber at the head of the stair. Nobody in the cottage is awake. The fire below breathes once and settles. The banked mound holds its red heart. Nothing in the room stirs. The clock ticks. The wind has fallen entirely. Outside the small window a low bright moon has come up over the roof of the neighbour cottage, and is throwing a small square of pale light onto the floorboards inside. Old Mrs. Wells, quietly, in the middle of the deep of the night, will get up once. She's 71 and her small aches wake her at 3 most nights. She sits up carefully so as not to wake anyone, wraps her patchwork around her shoulders, moves to the small chest between the beds, warms her hands over the china wash basin for the small remembered warmth of it, and sits a few minutes on the edge of her bed looking out at the low bright moon on the roof of the neighbour cottage. She thinks of nothing in particular, or she thinks of small ordinary things. She thinks that Sarah has been growing this year. She thinks that the smallest child's little cough is going to want the mother's honey and water for a few more days. She thinks of the little woodcut of the Queen above her chest, and the years she has watched the little woodcut, and the years the little woodcut has watched her. She lies down again. She is asleep in 5 minutes. Downstairs the kitchen is quiet. The clock ticks. The chain hangs. The banked fire breathes low. The pot is on the shelf. The mother's mending basket is on the dresser. In the corner beside the dresser, the old dog lifts his head once, listens to nothing in particular, lays his head back on his paws. Cottage adults of the country in the 1800s still often kept the small remembered pattern of a 2-sleep night, though by the middle of the century most of them had lost it. In the pattern a household went up at 9, slept from about 9 to about 1, rose for an hour of quiet by the banked fire and slept again from about 2 until dawn. The rising in the middle was called the watch. In it, the mother might do a small piece of mending, the father might read a page of the Bible, a small warm drink of hot honey and beer might be made. The pattern was softening by the 1800s, because the paraffin lamp lengthened the evening's proper sleep, and the 2 sleeps became 1 long sleep. Hannah does not keep the 2 sleeps herself, and she does not remember her mother keeping them, but the memory of them is in the country still in phrases she has heard old women use, and the memory is in the language of the parish's oldest villagers, who talk of the watch as a warm remembered thing of their grandparents' time. Beyond the small window the parish is folded in on itself under the moon. Down the lane 12 cottages of the row are dark. In every cottage the same picture. A mother asleep beside a father, children asleep in a chamber above, a fire banked below, a dog on the tiles, a pot on the shelf, a chain on its hook, a door bar dropped, a clock ticking its slow calm tock. 12 cottages in a small quiet row, kept overnight by a small piece of ash carefully laid over a small heart of living coal, on the strength of 1 skilled pair of hands per cottage. The parish beyond, a further 10 cottages scattered along the further lanes, and the cottages of the small village a mile down the road, and the small farmhouses at the edge of the plough, and the toll house at the parish edge with Mrs. Simmons awake by her small stove, and the shepherd's hut on the down where Mr. Peden is walking his ring, and the baker's shed at the top of the hamlet where Mr. Norris is at his oven, and the parish watchman down the main street with his lantern. All of it, a small, warm, quiet, living, cared-for thing under a low, bright moon. The wind has fallen entirely. Somewhere far away a fox barks once in a further field. Nearer, in the yard of the second cottage in the row, the neighbour's cat comes back from wherever cats go in the middle of the night, sits a moment on the wall, drops down into the yard and slips through a small gap in the door of the shed. Somewhere in the parish, some further mother in some further cottage is up at 3 with a further child. Somewhere a further father is turning in his sleep and settling again. Somewhere a further old widow is awake for her small 3 o'clock hour and looking out at the same low bright moon. Modern mirror moment, said very quietly, third and last. The rhythm of this night is still surviving. In every household anywhere tonight that ends a day slowly, that lays a warm meal down on a scrubbed table, that puts a child to bed with a small quiet ceremony and a soft word that quiets the room deliberately for the night rather than letting the night arrive unmarked. This rhythm is still being kept. It is not the same fire, and it is not the same chain on the same hook, and it is not the same rushlight burning 57 minutes on a scrubbed pine table, but it is the same shape. It is the same slow closing of the day. It is the same small ceremony of laying a household down to sleep, and every household that keeps it keeps something an English cottage of the 1800s also kept, and that 100 cottage generations kept before them, and that the country will keep in some form for as long as there are households in the world. The wind eases entirely. Outside the small dark window, the sky, very slowly, at the very first edge of dawn, begins to change colour. The fire is holding. The kettle is at rest. The house is settled. And that is where we are going next, into the first light. It is not yet dawn. It is a very slow greying at the far edge of the sky, the merest palest change from the black of the deep night to the first pale grey of the morning. In summer the change comes as early as 4. In winter, as tonight, it comes closer to 7. It is at this first grey that Hannah, out of a lifetime of the same small habit, is coming back down the stair. She's in her nightdress with her woolen shawl about her shoulders and her feet in a pair of the mother's old slippers. She takes the boards around the 3 creaks. She reaches the kitchen. It is dark. Only the small red glow of the banked fire is showing in the middle of the hearth. She kneels a moment at the hearth. She takes the poker. She works the poker gently under the ash of the banked mound. She turns the mound over, and there, in the very heart of it, exactly where it was last night when she laid it, one living red coal about the size of a hen's egg, glowing steady and warm, it is held. She takes a small piece of kindling from the pile by the door. She lays it on the coal. She blows softly, twice. The kindling catches. A small yellow flame comes up. She lays a second piece of kindling, a third. She lays a small length of ash. The morning fire begins. She hangs the kettle on the hob. She swings the pot forward on the chain over the small fire. There is a little of last night's broth to warm through for the father's breakfast crib, and she will add a fresh handful of bread and a scrape of butter to it in a moment. She goes to the pump in the yard, half fills the small bucket with fresh cold water, comes back, sets the bucket at the door. She takes down the tea caddy, unlocks it with the small brass key at her waist, measures 3 small pinches into the small brown teapot. All of it done without waking anybody upstairs. She stands a moment at the fire as it begins to build. The chain squeaks a little as she raises the pot a link. The shadow of the chain moves on the ingle wall. The rag rug is where it was. The pine table is where it was. The clock still ticks. Nothing in this room is different from the room of last night, except that the banked fire has become the morning fire, and the day is starting. And that is the answer to the question the hook asked. Who kept these fires warm for so many 100 years, on their own behalf, on ours? It was kept by hands like these, by a woman kneeling at a hearth at 7 in the morning to find the coal she laid down at 9 the night before, by her mother before her, by her grandmother before her, by 10,000 mothers in 10,000 cottages up and down the country, in every century since Britain was Britain, in every parish that ever had a hearth and a hand and a house to keep warm, by the baker at his oven at 4 in the morning, by the shepherd on his hill in the frost, by the parish watchman on his round, by the widow at her turnpike gate, by every unnamed woman in every unnamed cottage who was up at 3 with a child in her arms in a small point of made light, in an old attitude, holding a small warm sleeping weight against her shoulder, while the parish beyond her window slept. By hands, in a word. It was always kept by hands. The fire is coming up now, small and even. Hannah crosses to the door of the kitchen and opens it a moment onto the yard. The air is very cold. The grey at the sky is already faintly a paler grey. She stands a moment at the door, looking out at the small dawn coming. Then she closes the door and drops the bar back and comes back into the kitchen. She takes down her mother's largest teacup from the pine dresser. A heavy plain white cup with a chipped rim, sets it on the pine table, pours a stream of the newly hot kettle water into the teapot, sets the teapot on the shelf to draw. She sits down on the settle a moment. The dog, who has come down the stair without her noticing, comes over and lays his head across her feet. The fire in front of her comes fully up. And now, listener, in your own room, at your own hour, at whatever late or early time it is where you are, if you're still with us, know that the room we have been sitting in all night is not gone. Somewhere in the England of the 1800s, a mother knelt like this at a hearth in a small country cottage this morning, and the coal was where she had left it, and the fire came up. And somewhere in the England of tonight, a small thatched or pantiled cottage of that century is standing warm in the dark, extended, replastered, roofed, with new tile, lived in by strangers, its old beams unchanged, its old hearth remade in a new grate, its whole shape kept, and its mother of the household is asleep upstairs, and its dog is on the rug beside her fire, and its clock is ticking in a corner, and its walls are the same walls that held Hannah of this evening, and the rhythm continues. It has always continued. It will continue tomorrow. It is not lost. You are inside it as we speak. You are held within 4 feet of a settled ash. You are on a settle that has been worn to a shape by sitters just like you. You are wrapped in a blanket that came from a shepherd's ewe on a hillside near your parish. You are warm. The fire is banked. The cottage of the 1800s is settled in its own quiet, and the night will keep till morning. Sleep well, friend. If, when you wake, any part of tonight has stayed with you, tell me in a comment which part. I like to hear which small thing lodged. A soft like and a soft subscribe help the long calm ones find the people who need them, whenever you feel like it, and next time we will sit for an evening inside a very different kind of English room and see what the night was like there.